Good evening, little masters, and welcome to episode 125 of the Prancing Pony podcast, where tonight, well, we learned that Sean has fallen in with a rascal.
And I didn't expect that. Well, I've brought only a little money with me, too. Folks, we'll head over to the common room in just a moment, but first, I am Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who does have rather a rascally look now that I think of it, Alan Sisto.
That is true, but unfortunately, I lack the lineage of tonight's mysterious vagabond.
Well, that you do. I mean, although, we don't really know his lineage yet. I mean, we don't know his life story just yet,
No.
Hollywood hasn't made a biopic of Strider the Ranger yet.
I feel a really bad segue coming on.
You and everyone else who heard last week's episode, because
True.
Yes, as I promised last week, we're going to spend our intro time this episode talking about the Hollywood biopic blowing up your social media feeds.
That's right.
Tolkien, now playing at a theater near you.
In a world. That's all you got to say, right? You got the movie theater voice. Well, I suspect most of you have heard about this film by now. Tolkien was released by Fox Searchlight Pictures on May 10th here in the United States. Over in the UK, it was released the week before on the 3rd of May. It was directed by Dome Karakovsky from a screenplay written by David Gleason and Stephen Beresford, and, I'm quoting here, explores the formative years of the renowned author's life as he finds friendship, courage, and inspiration among a fellow group of writers and artists at school.
The film stars Nicholas Hoult of X-Men and Mad Max Fury Road fame as John Ronald Reuel Tolkien himself. It's also starring Lily Collins as Edith Bratt, the eventual Mrs. Tolkien, and a host of others. There's Cole Meany in there from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, right, Alan?
Mm-hmm. And Next Gen originally before that. Chief O'Brien got around, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Definitely a face and a name I knew, but I'm not up on my Star Trek.
No.
So he played Father Francis Morgan.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the always amazing Derek Jacobi as Professor Joseph Wright.
Speaking of Jacobi, did you know that he narrated the audiobook version of Farmer Giles of Ham?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's cool.
It's one that I still got to get a hold of, but yeah.
I'm going to have to look for that. Very cool.
Both Sean and I went to go see Tolkien a few days early. On May 7th, Tolkien played at the Montclair Film Festival in Montclair, New Jersey. Neither of us attended the New Jersey screening, just to be clear. Following the screening was a Q&A panel with the director and the two leads, hosted by Tolkien superfan Stephen Colbert. About 400 cinemas around the country showed the film early that evening, along with the Q&A panel simulcast, or delayed cast, if you will, for me, after the movie.
Oh, that's right, because West Coast, it would have been pretty early for you. So they delayed it.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about the movie, and we'll be talking a little bit about the Q&A panel. And I think it goes without saying, but we're going to say this anyway, this discussion is going to contain spoilers for the film.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want spoilers, you may want to skip ahead about, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 minutes in this podcast. Yeah. Maybe 30 and see where we are.
Yeah.
And see if we've gotten through it by then. So once again, spoilers follow. Skip ahead now if you don't want to hear those.
Yes, that's right.
So why don't we go ahead and get started? All
right. Well, I'm going to start with my overall reaction. We're going to get to some kind of a list of the good and bad, but my overall reaction, to be honest, was, I hate to say this, sort of meh. I mean, it has its wonderful moments, as we're going to get to in a little bit, and its weaknesses as well. But on the whole, it didn't strike me as anything really substantially better than just mediocre. Now, granted, that puts it in better company than the Hobbit films, but still.
Well, sure, yeah.
That's a low bar, man.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were going to give it a rating on a 5-star scale, I'd probably land on a 3, nothing higher. I know that's not going to go over well with some. There are a lot of folks out there who's going to love it because it's Tolkien, and others are going to hate it because of the artistic liberties that are taken. I ended up sort of in the middle, and that's not going to please anybody. But the truth is, it's a middling movie, so that's kind of why I landed there. I mean, really. Don't get me wrong. I want to make this clear. A lot of love and effort really did go into this. That is absolutely evident. There were some small details and little nods to knowledgeable fans that made it clear this was not just an attempt at cashing in.
Yeah, totally agree.
Absolutely. And I have to say that the Q&A, which we'll discuss in more detail shortly, really did help explain some of the film's shortcomings, but not all of them to my satisfaction, as we'll find out. My big concern, though, is I kind of wonder what audience is going to really enjoy this film. The hardcore fans, hardcore Tolkien fans, are going to be split. Some will despise the factual inaccuracies, while others are going to enjoy it just because it's Tolkien. But that niche, that hardcore Tolkien fan niche, isn't as big a niche as a movie studio needs to be successful. And I'm not sure a general audience is going to enjoy the story enough to propel this film to any level of success.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I can't really disagree with any of that. I mean, I have a lot of the same reservations. I think I'm still somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I probably am more at like a 3.5 stars out of 5.
It's fair.
Not much more than that, but probably a solid 3.5. I did enjoy it in general. There were some good performances there. I thought it was very beautifully shot. It was an entertaining enough film to watch. And, like you, I really appreciated the fact that, this really was a love letter to Tolkien and his work. Domé Karakowski is a fan. That was really clear from the Q&A. He's not just a Hollywood filmmaker looking to cash in on Tolkien fever. Like you said, this was a passion project.
Yeah.
And his love for Tolkien does shine through. But with all that said, like you said, it is kind of hard to know who this film was made for. I mean, it's not all that faithful to Tolkien's biography.
No.
Broad strokes are there, but some details are inserted and kind of invented. Other details are left out.
Yep.
And all throughout, things are presented kind of out of order to when they actually happen.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
Granted, I don't expect absolute faith to the biography in a biopic film. They're never faithful because human lives don't follow 3-act narrative structure.
No.
In order to comply with the canons of narrative art, if I can borrow a phrase from Tolkien's letters, filmmakers just have to take liberties because
I can only hear Shippy's voice saying that.
I know, right? Yeah, from that lecture, yeah.
Absolutely.
But filmmakers, they have to take liberties. It just kind of goes with the territory.
Of course.
I think you have to expect that going in. And moreover, filmmakers are going to pick and choose moments from that person's life to tell a particular story that fits a certain theme. And I think that Karakowski's done that. He's kind of focusing on Tolkien's friendships with the TCBS, his relationship with Edith to a slightly lesser degree. Surprisingly, that kind of takes a little bit of a backseat to the TCBS, I think. So anything that doesn't drive those two themes home is going to be left out. But I know all that, and going into a biographical film, I do kind of accept that. I'm satisfied enough if I get an entertaining story that at least does justice to the broad strokes of the person whose life is being depicted. And I was generally satisfied. And, with all that said, I mean, if I want a biography, I'll go read Humphrey Carpenter. I'll go read John Garth.
That's fair. I just would love to see one of those books turned into a documentary. But
sure.
A documentary is different from a biopic.
I would love to see a documentary of Tolkien's life, but you're not going to get that with a biopic.
No.
With all that said, though, going back to the question of who's this film made for, so many liberties are taken with Tolkien's life that I think people like us who have read biographies of Tolkien might be put off by some of the liberties that they take. And at a minimum, I think we're going to be disappointed that some of our favorite moments are left out. We're going to be disappointed at some of the stuff that's taken out. And I know we both got a list of those things.
We got a list, yeah.
And then on the other hand, as a film, just speaking independently of myself as a Tolkien fan and just as a movie fan, there are still some issues with pacing and with the storytelling of the film that kind of makes me wonder how much I can recommend it to the average person. If you walk in cold and you know nothing about Tolkien, do you walk away with a complete story? Sort of, but there's some misses there too.
There really are. Yeah.
And again, I think general audiences going in completely cold, I think they're going to be disappointed that you don't see him write The Hobbit. I mean, you do. Well, he writes the first line at the end, but it doesn't touch on how The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings came to be because it's covering the early period of Tolkien's life.
Yeah, and that's a great section of his life to cover, I think.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think that's probably where there's probably more drama in that part of his life than his later life.
Significantly more, yeah. I don't know, the Lit-Lang divide, there's a lot of drama there.
Not quite as cinematic, maybe.
No, probably really hard to depict visually, as Karakowski might say.
And I do think that Karakowski tries to throw a few bones towards The Lord of the Rings. Obviously, people have heard about some of the visual elements that kind of echo Lord of the Rings.
And that one moment when he says the word fellowship.
Yeah.
It just hits him like a bolt out of the blue. You're like, okay, yeah.
Stuff like that. It's harmless, but it's, Yeah.
I think I mentioned that in my, a lot of this is going to kind of be redundant with our Facebook Live discussion that we had over the weekend. And, I don't know how many of our listeners are following us on Facebook that also happen to watch that video. But if you do, you'll hear my summary of the film. If I were to take it up into 2 words, borrowed from Alan R., is mostly harmless. Of course, he borrowed those from Douglas Adams, but that's kind of what this is. It's just there. It's meh.
I'd go farther than meh. I'd say it's pleasant. But it's not perfect, and it's not Tolkien's biography. It's not a documentary.
No, and that's true. But let's go ahead and start off with the good stuff, right? And let's go ahead and list some of the things that we think they really nailed, things that we
Yeah.
really enjoyed. They may not have necessarily nailed these in terms of accuracy. They just nailed them in terms of a cinematic presentation.
Cinematic
Right.
presentation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You go first.
First thing that comes to mind, costuming. And there's an opportunity to give a shout out to Jez Hunt and Ancestor Leathercrafts. Jez is a longtime
Yeah.
listener to the show. He's the armorer on the movie and does a fantastic job.
An amazing job, Jez. Great work
Yeah.
there, man. It was so cool to see your name in the credits. I knew he had worked on it because he had told us he'd worked on it. But when I saw his name in the credits, I was like, I pulled my phone out and I took a picture, and I forgot my flash was on. So
oh no!
I got a dirty look from the people next to me, and then the picture came out blurry anyway. But I did see your name in the credits, Jez, and I was super stoked when I saw that.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I like that. I'd say along with that, the sets and locations. I thought they did a really good job with all of that. Really, all of the locations were well chosen, well shot. I particularly enjoyed the moment where he was walking with Professor Wright on Addison's Walk. I have to admit, I think I enjoyed that the most because I was just there in October, and it was
I bet,
very personal for me. I mean, it almost brought tears to my eyes to see that again. Wonderful moment. Casting of young Tolkien and the TCBS, I thought was a really good, the young versions of both of those, really, really well done.
Yeah, I like that. And speaking of the young Tolkien, I really like, there's a scene early on where Tolkien's mother is reading him the story of Sigurd.
Yes, that's awesome.
To me, that kind of captured the essence of the great green dragon anecdote. Not in a literal way, but it kind of drives the point home for general audiences that, his mother was an influence on him in terms of his love of these stories. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. And I love that they chose that particular story as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course. We know that one was really important to him.
One of my favorite moments of the film, I loved the moment when Tolkien recited the line from Christ, from the poem about Errand and Midgard.
Man, I love that one. Yeah.
That was just brilliant.
That was awesome. Although I have to say, I was surprised they didn't have him actually translate Midgard.
And
say
right.
Middle Earth in modern English. I mean, fans like us know what that word means, but I would think they would want to make that explicit for the general audiences. And I thought that was kind of a missed opportunity. Too. But I loved the bits of Old English and Middle English throughout.
Oh, yeah.
That scene of young Tolkien reciting Chaucer from memory on his first day at King Edward's School. That was
with perfect pronunciation, too.
Yeah. I mean, a little contrived. Come on, he's like a middle schooler, but it was fun, and it's just it just kind of gets at that image of Tolkien that we have as this brilliant philologist.
That was great. You're right. That was a wonderful moment.
The reading from the Battle of Malden poem with
I
Wright.
was about to go there. Yeah, me too. That was that was great stuff.
Thought shall be the harder, heart the keener, courage the greater, as our might lessens, and the where they fit that into the story.
Where they put that, you're not kidding. Yeah. As he's talking to Professor Wright, and then the other student walks in, and we're at war. England's at war. What a moment that was. Yeah. That whole Professor Wright subplot I thought was great. I really could have spent more time there. I kind of wish we had.
Have I mentioned I'm a huge Derek Jacobi fan? I mean, I've been like a huge fan of his since I, Claudius.
He is something, isn't he?
I would have loved to have seen more of him. Honestly, that was my only complaint. There is that, I think this was on Addison's Walk, wasn't it? Where they're actually talking about the etymology of oak. Yeah. That was kind of fun, although I have to say, having read Tom Shippey, I know that oak was one of Tolkien's personal symbols for the lit professors at Oxford, not the Lang.
Oh my goodness, that's right. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
The Lang professors, the philologists, were the birches, so maybe they should have been talking about the etymology of birch instead. But it was a super cool moment.
Really inside joke there.
That's seriously inside, yeah.
On a more serious note, I have to say, I wasn't nuts about the timing of when it came in and all of that, because it's not factually consistent, but I really did like that they included that letter from G.B. Smith. My chief consolation if I am scuppered tonight. That letter, it brings tears to my eyes to hear it every time. And even though it was, in the wrong time part of the story, is the wrong timeline, it still moved me deeply. Yeah.
And I'm sure the filmmakers would say that, oh, well, that's where it needed to be for dramatic purposes. But I also did not like where it was brought in. Basically, at the end, after Smith's death, Tolkien in the hospital recovering from trench fever,
Yeah.
In fact, I actually put it as one of my big problems with the film.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I'll get into a little bit later.
That was a hard moment for me to choose. The letter itself, I'm just glad they included it.
The letter's beautiful, of course. Yeah, it's good that they included it. You're right. I should give it more credit for that.
But you're right too. It's where it was included and the way it was included. It should have been done more accurately.
Yeah. And I know, look, folks, I know they have their reasons for doing this stuff.
Sure, of course.
You know, but
I'm not making a biopic, so who am I? Who am I to speak, right?
I mean, we're allowed to have opinions about it,
Of course we are.
But
in fact, that's rather our jobs at this point. But
exactly.
I thought one of the things I really enjoyed about the film was the way that Karakovsky made it clear that Tolkien was both a word nerd and an artist. That not just the Old English and Middle English and the conversations with Edith about created languages, but then also the visual art that he would draw and put up on the walls. I may not have been nuts about all of it. It didn't feel entirely consistent with Tolkien's own artistic style, but I love that they made that relevant to him because he was an artist.
They made a point of depicting it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
We've already said this. Samantha Karakovsky just has a tremendous appreciation for Tolkien.
Oh, yeah.
He did do his homework, and that was clear in everything. Mm-hmm. There are several moments with Edith. Actually, one of my favorite scenes in the movie, maybe my favorite scene in the movie, was the lunch date with Edith.
Oh, and yes.
The conversation they have there just showed such an understanding of Tolkien. They're talking about things like cellar door and, trying to figure out what that might mean, what Celador might mean in a story. And Tolkien's got this, it's a place, not a person. That was super cool. And
the whole idea about words being more than just sounds and associating the sound and the meaning. And that was a great moment. I don't know that the whole conversation makes my top of the list. It makes my good but not great. I think it could have been a lot better, but it was really a nice touch to include it at all, I have to admit.
Yeah, and I did feel like the discussion about, like you said, the relationship between sound and meaning, that's kind of a deep cut. I mean, things like
that's
cellar
like the
door.
Secret Vice deep cut. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Cellar door is kind of entry level, but sound and meaning, that's deep. And
that is.
Did Edith actually have that conversation with her boyfriend? Probably not, but it's so integral to Tolkien's writing and language creation that it really worked for me, at least. And also I don't think it was the same scene, but there was another point in the movie where Edith was talking about the importance of happy endings and the importance of hope.
Oh yeah.
And
you're right.
That's on fairy stories in a nutshell.
I think that slipped past me, actually. I was probably thinking about some factual inaccuracy instead. I need to watch it again.
Yeah.
I do also want to add about that moment, the date where they talked about cellar door. In there, I enjoyed the bit where Edith tosses the lump of sugar onto the ridiculous hat of somebody in the restaurant. I have to admit, my very first reaction was, oh, that's absurd. Why are they having her do something so silly? But then I remembered something from Carpenter's biography, and I looked it up, and here's the line. Edith and Ronald took to frequenting Birmingham tea shops, especially one that had a balcony overlooking the pavement. There they would sit and throw sugar lumps into the hats of passers-by, moving to the next table when the sugar bowl was empty.
That's awesome.
And I just thought that was one of those nods to those of us who've read the biographies, I think. And
totally right. That. And you know what? I had actually forgotten that. I'm watching that and I'm thinking, that is kind of weird. I mean, it's kind of fun. But we traded notes on this and you mentioned that. I was like, oh, wow, I totally forgot that from the biography. That's great.
I had too. I was like, it just something triggered my memory and I had to look it up. But yeah, indeed. Well, as we move down the scale from great to good and kind of less good, this is in that just under the top moments. I would say the music, maybe not quite the very best, but really good. It was almost great, had some truly great moments. I'll certainly be buying a copy. It was by Thomas Newman, who's done scores for WALL-E, Skyfall, Spectre.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, Finding Nemo, Finding Dory, going all the way back to Shawshank Redemption. He's done a lot, something like a dozen or more Academy Award nominations, even if he hasn't actually won the big one yet. But it's pretty nicely done.
I had no idea. I kind of remember impressions of the score. I don't really remember like any particular piece of music, but
there were some choral sections that were really nicely done, I thought too. Of course, Thomas Newman, by the way, is also cousins with Randy Newman, who's done a lot of very well known
Toy Story and a ton of stuff for Pixar.
Stuff.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. Let's see. I would also put in that same category of just slightly not quite as good. The casting of Nicholas Hoult as Tolkien. I'm not bashing his acting. I thought he did a fine job. But the thing is, it's just the casting. I kept thinking, he is too tall. He is 6'3". Tolkien was 5'9". He's my height. They could have had me. No, okay. I'm not skinny enough to have played the young Tolkien.
No.
But, seriously, 6'3" is too tall.
Honestly, I didn't notice that. I mean, I thought Holt was good. I've
Yeah,
seen Holt in
good.
a lot of movies before, and I've seen him put in better performances before.
Yeah.
Where I give him a little bit of leeway is I think he had a really hard job portraying
Oh, yeah.
the young version of a real person that we know so much about when he was older. We've
True.
got audio recordings of him when
Uh-huh.
he was older, and
Film
we've read
interviews,
his
TV.
letters,
Yeah.
so many interviews, and to play the young version and to have to kind of play him like a person in his 20s or his teens and 20s,
That would be hard, no doubt.
that had to be tough, and I think he did a good job, and I think
Yeah.
he didn't impersonate, which was one of my favorite things.
No, you're right. He
So
didn't
often
try to do that.
they impersonate the person, and I didn't feel like he did that. I
No.
thought Lily Collins was pretty good as Edith. I actually thought she was more than pretty good. I thought she was quite good, especially
Okay.
considering how little she had to go on. I found her portrayal of Edith, I thought she was really witty. I thought she was charming. I could really see her being somebody who could make Tolkien happy and who could inspire him.
Yeah, I could see that.
You had a different take, I know.
Yeah, she only made my okay list, but I have to admit, what you point out about the fact that there's just not much for her to go on, and she talked about a little of this in the Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of information about Tolkien as a young man from the various biographical sources.
Yeah.
We don't have that much information, if any, really, on Edith. And so
Right.
there's not much for her to go on. She had to invent it herself. I will give you this. She definitely was witty and charming. She certainly looked the part with the raven hair. And she could dance. I mean, that was wonderful. I didn't fall in love with the character like I'd hoped I would.
Yeah.
But in fairness, it is a hard role because there's not a lot of information about her.
Yeah, and I think that's where I enjoyed it enough when I was watching, but then when I saw the Q&A and she talked about how, without knowing anything about this character, she just looked at pictures of Edith when she was a young woman, and she saw, and I love this, she saw a cheekiness and she saw a wit.
Yeah.
And she distilled her character from that, and also from like reading Beren and Luthien and seeing, Luthien inspired by her. And that really came through for me. And I did think she did a good job with the part. Plus Lily Collins, daughter of Phil Collins. And so now that she's played Edith and Liv Tyler played Arwen, I think we need to get another rock star's daughter to play Luthien someday. So,
okay, that works. I would say on the same list of good but not quite great, I did enjoy the casting of Colm Meaney as Father Francis. It fell into a little bit of a trope, so to speak. He
wasn't quite as fleshed out, was he?
No, but I think that was more to do with the script than the casting.
Yeah, that's true.
I did like him. I would also add on that same list the camaraderie of the TCBS. I really, really did enjoy that, except the reason it didn't make my great list is that it just had too much Dead Poet Society going on.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. In fact, I even wrote Dead Poet Society in my notes before we even talked about this. That scene of Rob Gilson standing up to his father in the billiard room, that's straight out of Dead Poet Society.
Totally.
And it just didn't seem to have much of a place in this story, and I didn't really feel like it went anywhere after that either.
No, that's the thing. That thread just sort of disappeared. We don't know anything about what happened after that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You frankly could have replaced Hellheimer. Was it Hellheimer or Hellhamer?
I think they said it both ways. Yeah.
Yeah, but one guy kept messing it up.
I think Gilson kept on mispronouncing it, and I can't remember what the right way was.
I think he was saying Hellheimer, and they're saying it's Hellhamer.
Yeah.
So anyway, you could have replaced Hellhammer with Carpe Diem, and it frankly would have had the same effect.
Yeah, definitely. Although on the topic of Rob Gilson's subplot with his dad, I was got to give a little shout out to the actor Owen Teale. I did not expect to see this guy. This is he played Sir Alistair Thorne in Game of Thrones for people who've watched that. And he played Rob's father, the headmaster. Robert Carey Gilson.
I know. I liked him. I don't know that I've seen him in much else.
I'd never seen him in anything before, and I've only seen him in Game of Thrones. And I saw
he's got a strong presence in this one.
That dude looks familiar, character. And yeah,
intimidating as heck too.
Yes, and that's pretty much the character he played in Game of Thrones too.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Let's move on to the kind of the next tier down. These are the things where they really kind of just fouled this one off, if we're going to use a baseball analogy. They dropped the ball maybe. This isn't terrible, but this isn't a pick six where it's an interception run back for a touchdown. This is just an incomplete pass, okay?
Yep.
Somebody's going to have to explain that to our non-American football folks, but we'll try. I would say for that, the storylines around school, King Edward's and Oxford, just kind of mostly okay.
Yeah, I kind of had a problem with constantly seeing all four of the TCBS at Oxford after we're told that two of them went to Cambridge.
Right, right.
I mean, like we see the scene with Tolkien commandeering the bus at Oxford, but it's with his TCBS friends. It's not the way it really happened. And I don't know. I think that that's something that would be problematic for general audiences as well as just Tolkien fans. They're like, wait, weren't these guys going to Cambridge? Why are they
Is
here
that next
all the
door?
time?
I mean,
Right.
Yeah. Well, they don't make it clear enough, frankly, that Gilson and Wiseman are in town for the rugby match. I mean, that is why they're there, so it's okay.
Was that what it was? Because I didn't get that at all. But
yeah, I know. I had to think back to why they were all there. What were they doing there? And I remembered, oh yeah, it's because of the rugby match. But here's the thing I kind of got out of that segment. Why in the world have them commandeer the bus and not take it to Carfax Tower like he did in real life?
They just kind of like hung out on the bus.
What a crazy scene that would have been, huh?
Yeah.
Driving down the street. I mean, just great stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, a real life moment that they could have used that would have had a ton of drama, a ton of fun, and they just left it.
There were a handful of those, weren't there? It was
there
like,
why
why invent this when you could have taken something else?
Yeah, when the reality is so much better.
Mm-hmm.
I would also put in this category the, frankly, way too long scene behind the theater for the ring cycle. Oh, just dragged on and on and on.
Did it? I mean, I like Wagner, so it was enjoyable enough for me, and I thought it was fun seeing the two characters together. But I will tell you what I did have an issue with. That flyer that he's holding in that scene, that implied they were going to see the ring cycle, right?
Oh my goodness,
That's not one opera. That's 4 operas. That's like 15 to 18 hours of opera that's usually performed over a weekend. I don't think they were hiding in that prop room on a single date. That's way too long to spend on a single date.
Well, it depends on what you want to do during that
Well,
day.
yeah, as I'm saying that, I realize
But they're good. They're good people.
They were young people.
They were good. Well, I am not going to taint Tolkien's honor that way. No. Yeah, you're right. There's no way. 15 hours worth of opera. No. That's longer than Jackson's extended version of all 3 films.
Right, right.
And of course, just the artistic license that was taken in a lot of cases. I might even put this into the bad, but I left it in the okay because I understood the cinematic reasons for it. But having Tolkien and Edith reunite literally on the docks as he's leaving instead of marrying months before.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why they did it. It's for dramatic purposes, the dockside kiss and all that stuff. But yeah, it kind of bugged me too.
I mean, cinematic reasons and all that. Canons of narrative art, I suppose, require that sort of, last minute drama. But, they'd been reunited. They'd become engaged 3 years prior to his departure. So that was just, come on, really?
Right. Yeah.
Similarly, another timeline issue. I didn't like that they had the TCBS start when he appeared to be something like 14 years old.
Yeah.
They look like they're in junior high. The TCBS didn't get started until he was 19.
Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. On the topic of timeline misses, I mean, like Edith dancing under the hemlocks when they were, basically when they're kids in Birmingham, not later after the war. It was actually 1917 in Rus after they were married, where she had that famous dance. And that to me is such an iconic moment and so important to Tolkien's writing that I really wanted them to do it right. And I mean, it was awesome to watch for a few seconds. It gave me chills in the trailer and it gave me chills for a few seconds, but then that's all it was. It was just a few seconds.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, points for what they did, because I thought it was really nice.
Including it at all was good, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the way it was performed, I was super impressed by the fact that Lily Collins improvised her dance moves while listening to Florence and the Machine.
Finding that on the Q&A was interesting, wasn't it?
But so points for all that, but I think, I don't know, it loses points for me for just being too short and just being at the wrong point in the timeline where it just...
I agree.
It didn't make as much sense to me.
I agree. It could have been one of the most iconic visual moments in the entire film, and they didn't do it right.
Yep.
I would also say another similar timeline issue was having Smith die when he did and on the front lines. In fact, he died significantly later. He was miles behind the line arranging a football match for his troops when a stray artillery shell hit nearby, and he would later die from his injuries. It was Gilson that died on the front, and that was on the very first day of the Battle of the Somme on the 1st of July.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And while we're on the battlefield, I mean, I would say that in all the visual allusions to Tolkien's work, the Balrog, and then there's what I thought was Morgoth. I think a lot of people thought it was Sauron, but it seems like Morgoth to me.
It had to be Morgoth, right.
The smoke hands and all that stuff that's meant to suggest that Tolkien is sort of envisioning Middle-earth on the battlefield. I got what he was going for, but it just didn't quite work for me.
Yeah, me neither. I just wasn't a huge fan. I mean, it was well shot, don't get me wrong. Part of that, of course, being due to the amazing uniforms, Ches. I just wasn't a fan of the hallucination fever dream concept. It it felt like the film was suggesting that much of Tolkien's legendarium was inspired by hallucinations. That's obviously not true.
Right.
But I will admit the director's commentary on this in the Q&A panel helped clear it up a bit for me. It still wasn't one of my favorites, but it probably moved it from absolute, this was terrible to, okay, I didn't really like this, but all right.
Yeah. And, I'll admit, we've talked about this a couple of times now. And so
Yeah.
I don't think I quite got that those were like trench fever hallucinations at the time. Sure, he was obviously sick, but I don't know. It just didn't quite come through to me. So it didn't kind of put me off as much, but it was still
I'm
kind
thinking
of
at least
odd.
the last sequence, the very last
Where it starts to get
logs.
really...
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're right. I didn't get it when I was watching it, though. It was just kind of weird to me.
Yeah. I remember thinking the same thing when I saw the preview in December, this was weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
But having the Q&A panel helped a little bit.
Yeah.
So here's the how did they miss this? These are the things that, why didn't they include these? They should have, because these would have been great cinematic moments, but they didn't, and why? The first thing that jumps out at me, I love this moment in the biography, the Carpenter biography, that story about Tolkien seeing the Welsh language on train cars. That's a visual moment. Would have been perfect for him to see them, easily included, and they didn't. I don't get it.
I was actually more surprised that they didn't include anything about his discovery of Finnish. Because, especially because there's a lot of early Quenya thrown around, and
true,
the director is actually Finnish. Yeah,
yes,
I would have thought he would have jumped on that, but
yeah,
I think we all have those moments of like, how did they miss that?
Yeah. Well, another how did they miss that was simply just not enough about his mother. Just not enough about her influence on his life. And I think we'll get to, one of the reasons why they didn't in just a bit. But I would also add to that in terms of his early life, where was his amazing early poetry? I granted there was the nod to it in the cellar door talk, but that was about it.
Yeah, you're right. This one's just personal to me. I might be the only person who really wanted to see the TCBS guys performing Aristophanes in Greek, but there's none of that. Okay, I might not be the only one. Tom H. might also be listening to this and thinking that he would have liked to see that.
I would have liked to have seen that, but come on. That's probably...
I know. That's deep. That's deep.
Another classic visual moment that I don't understand why they missed. Why did they have him wrap up the film writing the opening line of The Hobbit like he was just trying to write? He was grading exam papers and he wrote it on the back of an exam paper. That's a classic anecdote that so many people know and a total missed opportunity.
I agree. And I think that's something that a lot of general audiences know. It's actually the first thing I learned about Tolkien before I even read The Hobbit. I knew how he started writing it. And I just don't get that. Yeah. For me, this is kind of a big one for me. Cutting out all the letters that the TCBS wrote to each other in the trenches. Yeah. That to me was a huge missed opportunity for some great moments of real human drama that actually happened. Unlike, some of the invented dramatic points that we got instead. I mean, like we were talking about earlier, Smith's chief consolation letter in the movie, Tolkien gets that after Smith's death, after he's back in England with trench fever. And it was strongly implied that letter was one of the last things that G.B. Smith wrote. Right. In reality, that letter was sent February 3rd, 1916. Tolkien read it before he shipped out to France.
That's exactly right.
Smith died 10 months later, and they spent all that time writing letters to each other. Really.
And to the other members of the TCBS.
Yeah, and to the other members of the TCBS, and lots of really good, beautiful letters.
Flesh out that story about the inspiration that the TCBS gave him. Why not do that?
Yeah,
why fabricate something when the real life version is more dramatic?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
Didn't get that. Yeah.
I mean, like there's the letter that Tolkien wrote to G.B. Smith when he actually heard about Gilson's death, because Smith was still alive. Yeah. It was August 1916. Right. It's actually letter number 5 in Carpenter's Letters volume. That's the Something Has Gone Crack letter.
Oh, yeah.
It is absolutely heartbreaking, and there's nothing of it here.
No.
And to me, that seems really strange, especially because I kind of felt like Gilson was a bigger presence in the movie than Smith was among the TCBS guys.
Yeah, till the end, right.
Until the end, yeah. Gilson was the one who was kind of more charismatic when they were younger, and he's the one who goes off and does the crazy stuff, like, flirting with the barmaid, stuff like that.
The barmaid to marry him,
yeah. Yeah, and so we didn't see any of that, and that was such a great letter. I don't know, just having Tolkien learn about Gilson's death later, after he's in the hospital, after Smith is also dead, I don't know, it just...
Yeah. It felt like an afterthought, didn't it? Oh, by the way, and Gilson's dead too. I mean, it just...
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden Smith became sort of the focus.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is another thing. I don't know that it's bad, but it was something that was kind of glaring in its absence.
Uh-huh.
Beren and Luthien are never named.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Even in the final caption of the film, it
Yeah.
says,
I noticed
and
that.
I'm paraphrasing, but it says something like the names of two of Tolkien's characters are on
Right.
Ronald and Edith's
I think it's
tombstones.
something like the name of a mortal man and an immortal elf are on their
Right. Yeah,
tombstones.
exactly. They kind of
Okay.
encapsulate the story. And all I can figure with that was that maybe because he didn't have rights to adapt the
Oh,
published
yeah.
works, maybe
Maybe.
Karakowski couldn't name them. But I
Oh,
kind of questioned the decision to tiptoe around it because it just, to me, saying some characters, a mortal man and
right.
an elven woman, that just seemed, it just seemed very jarring. And I think if he just hadn't
It
said
did.
anything about the tombstones, it would have been less noticeable.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of is the studio didn't want to risk including the names. I mean, there's a minimal payoff, right? Only the hardcore are going to know the names, and we already know about them anyway. And then there's also the risk that, if the estate were upset with that or felt like they were violating some sort of copyright, maybe not even the estate, because, well, no, Baron and Luthien, that would be under the estate. I was thinking of Lord of the Rings stuff where it's Saul Zent's company.
Although Baron and Luthien are mentioned in Lord of the Rings, aren't they? You say like only the hardcore would know the names, but I mean anybody who can remember Viggo Mortensen,
the appendices, or even the chapter Strider, right?
Yeah.
Or is that a Knife in the Dark when it's Knife in the Dark, isn't it?
Knife in the Dark. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. So that was just one little thing. I mean, I guess moving on to some of the really big gripes.
Yeah. And boy, we're taking a lot longer than we thought to do this, but folks, this is an important film, so we're going to talk about it.
This is the unfiltered. This is the Prancing Pony podcast treatment.
Yeah, full treatment. Yeah.
I would just say that in contrast to this segment, the timeline of the film was so rushed. I think,
well put.
I think it could easily have been a 3-hour film instead of the 2 hours it was. And I realized that would have presented problems too. But
yeah,
I don't know. One moment you've got Tolkien working with Joseph Wright on a philology paper at Oxford. The very next scene, you see him enlisting in the army and going off to war. And then later in the movie, you see him as a professor. You never saw him graduate. You never saw him finish
or
his
get married.
Or get married. Wait, you never. That's right. You never saw him get married.
You never see him get married. No, you don't. It's so weird.
And so there are just some things that are just strangely left out, and I think it would be hard for a person with no knowledge of Tolkien's life to really engage with the story.
Absolutely. There's lots of that stuff. I keep flashing back to that moment after their mother died. And it was even weird then because you're not certain that she's dead. You know she's unconscious. They come in, she's slumped over, and he hugs her, and you think, oh man, she must have died. But it's not like it's not like we see a funeral scene or anything along those lines. It just immediately jumps to a scene apparently months later because he talks about how they've been living in other places when Father Francis is trying to get them at the boarding house. That was just this really odd jump that didn't make any sense.
Yeah. And partly as a result of some of these odd jumps, we do get these incomplete story arcs, don't we? I mean, we've mentioned a few of them. We talked earlier about the confrontation between Gilson and his dad. That doesn't go anywhere.
Nowhere. Yeah.
There's a scene where Christopher Wiseman flirts with Edith. And then, remember, Tolkien gets mad. He takes Edith out of there. And I love the scene where they have a fight and Edith is giving him grief for, taking her out of there. I thought it was a great moment for Edith. I thought,
it was real strong character.
She's strong. She's witty. She can hold her own with these brilliant young men. And I thought that's great.
Yeah.
But then it never goes anywhere in terms of his relationship with Edith or his relationship with Wiseman or
no,
I don't know.
I mean, unless maybe that's the rationale behind Tolkien punching Wiseman on the bus, but that's significantly later in the story.
Maybe,
so
if
that's the connection, there's nothing to make that connection.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
when we talked about the where did the time go bit, the recovery from trench fever to being a full professor with kids. I mean, like 7 or 8 years have gone by, at least, judging by the age of the kids, maybe more like 10. And he didn't even look a day older either, which was weird.
Yeah.
They didn't try to age him. He looked like the same 19-year-old or, 24-year-old that he'd been looking like the entire time.
Yeah. Lots of passage of time strangeness with the movie.
Yeah. Well, this next thing that I want to say, it could come across as controversial, especially if you don't listen to us on a regular basis. I think if you do, you'll know that we don't have anything against anybody. We certainly don't have anything against the LGBTQ community, but I have to admit along those lines, I didn't like what I thought was a very obvious implication that G.B. Smith was romantically attracted to Tolkien. That scene, it was the morning after Tolkien had gotten drunk, and they're at that fencing match, and it's where Tolkien ends up meeting Joseph Wright. There's a moment where G.B. Smith talks to him about unrequited love that I felt was evidence of this romantic attraction. Now, there was no evidence in real life to support that sort of implication, and it seemed really forced. That was something that came up in
Hmm.
the focus group that I was involved with in December at the preview screening. And a lot of participants praised the inclusion, right? I mean, we've got to have inclusion and all that.
Sure, yeah.
And so they wanted that, and they actually wished it had been made even more obvious. And I couldn't get away from that. It really kind of
With
broke
no
that
basis
scene.
in fact.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Well, just with
yeah.
no basis in fact.
That's really interesting because I know we've talked about this a few times, and I'm going to be totally honest. I do see how you got that, and
Uh-huh.
going back and thinking about the scene, I guess maybe I might have missed something because I've
Hmm.
heard from a few others who said the same thing. I didn't really get that from those scenes at all, honestly. I mean,
Huh. Okay.
to me, what I saw there was something more like the love that we see, well, let's just say between male characters in The Lord of the Rings, like the love Sam has
Okay.
for Frodo. And
Hmm.
to me, when I watched that scene, I thought, oh, that's what he's doing. He's showing that deep but platonic love between like
Okay.
Sam and Frodo. And
Right.
yeah, I know people try to read into that too. They try to look for romantic
yeah.
subplot there too. But I
Yeah.
think Tolkien was so good about showing men having these strong friendships, and he was not
He
afraid
was.
to show men love each other in a platonic way. So that to me that's what I got from that. I felt like that was an homage to that. But
Man, if I'd gotten that, I would have loved it. I mean, truly.
well, I've heard what you said from a couple of different people. So yeah,
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I see. That's the thing. I would have loved it if I felt like that's what he was trying to portray, and I think it would have felt that way if they hadn't had Smith say. And I have to say, I'm paraphrasing because, of course, I can't take literal notes as I'm in the theater. He talks about love that is not or cannot be returned, and he's talking about an unrequited love. The love between Sam and Frodo, this deeply collegiate sort of love, that's mutual. It seemed clear to me, though, that Smith's love for Tolkien was unrequited, which would make it something different than the brotherly love that Tolkien clearly had for Smith. I mean, Tolkien loved Smith. We see that. He practically sacrifices his life trying to find him on the front lines. That's love. He demonstrates love for Smith, but we're talking an unrequited love, which I don't know. Maybe I read too much into it. I don't think so. It felt like that was something they were going for, that it was a subtle
It could have been
under thing.
It totally could have been. I didn't see it, and I didn't see it as obvious. Certainly, I would say. I mean, I think Sam loves Frodo more than Frodo loves Sam. I'm going to go ahead and put that
That's
out there.
fair. That's
we'll
fair.
Talk,
No,
we'll talk more about
can't
this when we
disagree.
see them closer, and I think maybe
It may be a slightly different kind of
maybe so.
It's a dedication.
Yeah.
Partly
And,
maybe
well, remember,
coming
it's
from
like
his
the
class.
Endor versus Endil. Remember that? The
Yes,
devotion.
that was a great conversation. I remember that. Yeah, and it was having to do with somebody who's above you, like a master.
Yeah.
I think you're right. No, that's fair. But it's still requited. Frodo certainly loves Sam, and Tolkien certainly loves Smith. Anyway, I don't want to go too deep into that. I know we've got a lot more to talk about. But
Yeah, and maybe if there's a failing there, we can agree it was ambiguous, wasn't it? And maybe they were trying to be ambiguous so that they could kind of
for that purpose
straddle the line
maybe.
and try and be inclusive without really being inclusive,
I guess. I don't know. That just threw me for a loop for a few minutes. But
yeah,
I think really my biggest gripe, because that really actually pales in comparison to what my biggest gripe is. My biggest gripe is the way that religion was reduced to almost a non-existent role in Tolkien's life, when
I've heard
the truth
that a
is
lot,
significantly different.
Mhm.
And I don't say that as somebody who shares his worldview, because of course I'm not Catholic, so I can't speak to the level of involvement in his faith that Tolkien had. I know that he went and served Mass every day as a young boy. And that's the kind of thing that they could have visualized. And it felt like the only reference to religion in the film was as a source of conflict between Tolkien and Father Francis. That's really it. That was the only really explicit reference to religion. Now,
I do agree, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was this devout Catholic, and I can't help but think that the removal of all these Christian elements, aside from the brief line from the Christ poem, was kind of an attempt to maybe sanitize the religious Tolkien. He was overtly, deeply religious, and today's audience isn't, for the most part. It's a mostly secular audience these days. I get that. That's just how it is. And the director even suggested as much. He talked about a scene involving the young Tolkien with last rites for his mother, and how that didn't go over with focus groups. They didn't understand it. They didn't identify with it. Well, of course not. If it's a secular audience, they're not going to get that. Even I don't, because of course, as a Protestant, last rites is alien to me.
Mm-hmm.
But it just doesn't take more than a few minutes reading Tolkien's letters to understand the importance of his faith. And I get it when you're setting aside to look at his stories. You need to set it aside because you don't want to read too much into it. There's that danger of trying to read it as an allegory. his stories are not an allegory.
Right.
Set aside that understanding. But when you look at the man himself, I think you need to look at that a little more deeply.
Yeah, hey, look, I get it. I totally agree with you. I think you're right. I'm saying this as a person who lives a secular life. You know this.
Right.
We've talked about it a
Right.
few times. It hasn't come up recently on the podcast, but
Well, no. First season, when we talk about the creation of the universe, it
right,
kinda comes
exactly.
up.
It came up a bit more. But to me, as a secular person, but knowing how important Tolkien's religion was to him, yeah, I felt the absence of it. And
Yeah.
it was interesting to me what you just now said about setting it aside to look at his stories, but not to look at the man himself. I'm remembering something from the Q&A where Stephen Colbert, who is deeply Catholic, from what I understand,
Yeah, he is. That's
he's a very
true.
devout Catholic. He pointed out in the Q&A how Tolkien kept overt references to religion out of his work.
Right.
But again, for a film focusing on his life, I do think a closer look at how being Catholic affected his life would have been welcome. And
Yeah.
Karakowski
Yeah.
did say that it wasn't intentional. He just said that visualizing religion is challenging. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not a film director, but I do feel like you could have visualized his faith by showing how it defined his relationships. You know, his relationships with the TCBS, the
Absolutely.
philosophy of the TCBS in general, his relationship with Edith, her conversion to Catholicism.
Boy, that was big. Yeah.
I don't know why he left it out. Maybe it is, as you said, because it just didn't resonate as much with modern audiences.
Modern audience.
And I don't know
Right.
if that was a director decision or a studio decision, but
That's
I
true,
agree.
too.
It
Yeah.
definitely was left out. And I think for anybody who knows a lot about Tolkien's life, you feel the absence.
You really do. The thing is, when you read the biographies, it's really strongly present. In Carpenter's biography, we learn that, like we talked about a minute ago, he and Hillary ended up spending a lot of time in the Birmingham Oratory. Carpenter says it soon became their real home, even though at that time they were living with an aunt. That was also the period where Carpenter says that the brothers would hurry round to serve Mass for Father Francis before eating breakfast in the refectory. Later on, Carpenter points out that Tolkien recorded sadly that his first terms at Oxford had passed with practically none or very little practice of religion. But then that wasn't to last. The next year, he was attending Mass regularly and had perhaps chosen to forget his lapses of the previous year. I honestly don't think it would have been hard to show the young brothers serving Mass, or to show the college-age Tolkien struggling with his faith.
Yeah, I agree.
Or to show he and Edith having that conversation about conversion.
Yeah.
But I think it all goes back to what we talked about earlier, how there wasn't much about his mom and her influence.
Yeah.
That, I think, is why we don't see as much of the religious influence, because that deep devotion to Catholicism was directly
from his
related
mother.
to his
Yeah.
exactly to the deep devotion that he had to his mother, who had converted to Catholicism herself,
Right.
and had, as a result, been banished essentially from her family, had lost all support, and
Right.
that's quite possibly one of the reasons why she died when she did. They didn't have the funds to try to get her healthy, to get a doctor to regularly see her
Right.
for her diabetes, which of course back then was significantly more serious than it is now. And it's still a very serious disease. It's just much more treatable.
Right.
It just disturbed me that they couldn't find a way to show religion, but they could certainly find a way to make him drunk in public, which
Oh,
I know we talked about that before. I just find that disappointing. Like, that just seems strikingly out of character. Not drinking, of course. We know he drank. I just think the whole drunk in public stumbling along, like, I mean,
you
just
don't think that a guy who enjoyed alcoholic beverages his whole life probably had one embarrassing night once in his life when he
maybe.
just got bad news about the girl he loved?
Maybe, but I don't know that it would have been something that we had to see on film.
It was fun. I thought it was fun at least, but I know I've had a couple of nights like that in college. So I'm calling an audible on this one because you talk about something like that. I actually was far more offended by the idea that he almost flunked out of Oxford.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Which was like
totally.
a big subplot.
Are
in
you
the movie.
kidding me? What,
and
are you going to be sent down? Are you joking? That was ridiculous.
Yeah, he did not. If you read, I got this from John Garth's Tolkien at Exeter College. You'll see that he didn't do that badly when he was studying classics. He finished with, I think they call it a class 2 or a second. He wasn't a first. Yeah. And if he wanted to pursue a career in academia, which of course he did, he probably should have gotten a first. Yeah. But he wasn't flunking out. He wasn't going to be. What was the phrase? He wasn't going to be sent down. Yeah.
No.
It wasn't anything like that. And that to me was like, oh, no, you did
totally
not.
Unnecessary. Come on.
But again, maybe it's just trying to appeal to a mainstream audience, and I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, half the people that have gone to college have been in danger of being sent down. So.
Right.
So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the panel because so many people aren't going to be able to see this, at least not right away. We do hope that it's included in the Blu-ray release or the digital release. Maybe it'll even be released sooner than that in some sort of format on YouTube.
If we see it pop up on YouTube, we will share it.
We
will
share it
you.
immediately.
And if any of you see it out there on YouTube, send it to us so that we can share it. Because it was
a great discussion.
It was an absolutely great panel. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start off with the host. Colbert really is a pretty knowledgeable fan. I think we already know that.
Yeah.
Granted, he cannot pronounce Smaug. He pronounces it Smog. And
You're not going to let that go.
No, I'm not. He botched a biographical fact about Tolkien's mother. He talked about her marrying a Catholic and being rejected by her family, but of course that wasn't the case at all. Arthur was Protestant. She didn't convert to Catholicism until a few years after
he died,
his
and she moved back. Yeah.
Yeah, but of course we've made worse mistakes, so I have to forgive.
That is true. We can't throw stones.
No, and he really did show off some incredible knowledge. The impromptu recitation of the Bath song was phenomenal. I have to admit.
Yeah. That was great. That was awesome and surprising too. I mean, he started with The Road Goes Ever On, and he brought the Bath song in at the very end, I think, or close to the end.
And totally impromptu. I mean, the opening with the Road song you knew was prepped. But the Bath song was totally off the top of his head. It was well done.
Awesome. It was awesome.
Really great.
I think my favorite comment from Colbert in the Q&A was his comment about women in Tolkien's writings, and the fact that he said they're higher than the men. We've talked about men marrying up in Tolkien's work, and he cited Luthien destroying. He said Sauron's tower. That's Tolan Gowerhoth. Stephen, come on, you know the name. You can use it. Don't be afraid. Let your geek flag fly.
Yes.
He listed that as an example of how Tolkien's women have power. I loved that. I thought it resonated with the depiction of Edith in the film.
I agree.
My second favorite comment from Stephen Colbert was his anecdote about how he was just talking off the cuff, and he just said, I was listening to the Treebeard chapter on the audiobook just to have something like, I think he said, some stillness and some light in his life.
Some peace or something. Yeah, it was nice moment.
I love that. And I think that's what Tolkien means to us, right? And it's just always nice to hear somebody as a household name, a successful person like Stephen Colbert, just talk about his fandom with such earnestness. I thought that was neat.
I agree. I really liked listening to him talk about it. It was great. I have to admit the director won me over, though, when near the end, he referenced the character of Tauriel as a travesty. I thought that was awesome. And Colbert followed it up by saying she's non-canonical, and that's the nicest thing that can be said.
Well said, gentlemen.
Oh, I laughed heartily when I saw that. Yeah, good stuff.
I mean, we've said this a couple of times. Karakowski is a fan. I mean, he
absolutely is.
He traded Akalabath references with Colbert. I mean, he was talking about reading the Father Christmas letters. He actually quoted Tolkien's letter, the "She Was My Luthien."
Yes,
letter
the one that he wrote to Christopher Tolkien that we recently did
Edith
an episode.
died. Yeah. As we've said a few times now, he's not just some guy trying to cash in on Tolkien fever. This is a passion project for him, and it did show.
It absolutely was. It definitely showed, even with the flaws. He also earned points for me when he gave a copy of John Garth's book to Colbert as a gift. I literally shouted out yes in the theater. People looking at me, I was like, yes. Oops.
That was pretty awesome. I almost had a reaction like that, but this was after I had gotten the nasty look because of taking a flash picture of Jez's name in the credits, so I didn't want to do anything to annoy the people next to me again.
I would have been even more impressed, though, had Karakowski given him a USB stick with all of our episodes on it.
That would have been wonderful, actually.
Phenomenal.
If anybody would like to do that.
You're welcome to it, please. I have to say, the explanations of both the director and, to some extent, Nicholas Hoult did help me understand some of the things I didn't like so much, but I didn't buy his excuse about the centrality of faith to Tolkien's life, the whole thing about it being hard to visualize. That I just didn't buy. I don't know if, like you said, maybe he's covering for the studio because it was a studio decision to kind of sanitize it, make it more secular, or if it was his own call. I don't know that it was his own call because he talked about having done a faith-based film.
Yeah.
I don't recall the name of it.
He did say that.
He'd also talked about having officiated at a wedding once. He kind of as a side mentioned that he had been a minister. So, doesn't sound to me like that was something that he necessarily would have chosen to do, but it may have also been a time factor. But either way, it still didn't change it. But for other issues, I definitely enjoyed hearing some of the explanations because it shed some light and helped me to kind of see things a little bit more differently. I loved what Nicholas Hoult said about starting to do illustrations when he learned that Tolkien was an illustrator. I thought that was great.
Yeah, that was really cool. I really liked Lily Collins said something about how she enjoyed being an actress because her storytelling helps people escape.
Yes.
That was cool. That was just straight out of On Fairy Stories. I thought that was
Yeah.
neat.
Whether she's read that or not, I don't know. But
So yeah, I'm not sure if she's read that, but she definitely connected with it, and I thought that was
yeah,
cool.
I agree. Yeah.
Also glad for her that she didn't get the role of Tauriel, which I found out that she auditioned for in the Hobbit
Yeah.
movies.
That was interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah. So
good for her that she didn't get it.
yeah.
You know, the director repeatedly referenced the Silmarillion, and when Collins was asked about being immortal, they'd asked, what race would you be? And she'd said she wanted to be an elf. Karakovsky even talked about death being the gift to men, and that took Colbert by surprise. He called it a deep cut, and I absolutely love that moment.
That was pretty awesome, especially for that audience, man. Like that is a totally deep cut for that audience, but
totally deep cut.
That was cool. It was a fun panel, and if we can find a way, if we see it out there anywhere, again, we will share it.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up here in a little bit, but I wanted to do one last thing. We wanted to talk about something that listener Trotter pointed out. It was a quote from Tolkien's letter number 13. In speaking about possible illustrations for the American version of The Hobbit, Tolkien told C.A. Firth, who was at Allen and Unwin, it might be advisable, rather than lose the American interest, to let the Americans do what seems good to them, as long as it was possible, I should like to add, to veto anything from or influenced by the Disney studios, for all whose works I have a heartfelt loathing. Very famous line.
Yes.
I think we mentioned it on our postscript episode 53 way back at the beginning of season 2, but I'm not sure if we brought it up on the maid feed before.
I don't know if we did. I might have brought it up in passing when we did our Facebook Live event from Disneyland a few months ago.
Oh, yeah. A few months ago. That's almost a year ago, right? I think that was in November of 2018.
Yeah, I guess it is. It has been a while now, but yeah. Yeah.
My goodness. Well, Trotter mentioned that he didn't think the professor would be happy with the production because it was released by Fox Searchlight Pictures. And as folks who are up on their entertainment news will know, Fox is now owned by Disney.
Yeah.
Oh, the irony.
Trotter's got a good point about that. And okay, look, I've got a few responses here. I will admit I don't personally share Professor Tolkien's heartfelt loathing of all things Disney. I think that's quite clear from some of the references I drop on this podcast.
Probably.
But if I did, I would just say principal photography wrapped on Tolkien back in December 2017. So this thing has been in the works since long before Disney acquired Fox in, I think, March 2019 was when they closed the deal. And I think they announced it a year before that. So it's not like Disney greenlit this project, if that helps. But
True.
But still, I don't doubt that Trotter's right on, although I'm pretty sure the professor would be unhappy with this production for a lot of reasons, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I think that's quite clear. I never said that. I didn't do that. Wait a minute, what are you doing?
But again, with all that said, I know it feels like we've listed some good and some bad. None of it stopped me from enjoying this movie for what it was. I enjoyed it.
There you go.
I will watch it again. I think I said this. I'd give it 3.5 stars out of 5. That's a solid 3.5.
Right.
I will watch it again. I'm looking forward to watching it again. I will tell everyone who sees it and everyone who asks me about it, read the biographies.
Absolutely.
Go get a copy of Carpenter's biography. Go get a copy of Tolkien and the Great War by John Garth. Go get Tolkien at Exeter College by John Garth as well. Listen to our episode 44, interviewing John Garth. Then you'll have a better understanding of the facts behind what's an enjoyable enough, but not perfect and not completely accurate biopic.
Agreed. Even though I would only give it 3 stars, I will still watch it again when it comes out on 4K. I'll watch it with my wife and when my kids are much older with them.
It'd be gorgeous on 4K, actually, yeah.
Oh, it's going to, with HDR and all of that. It's going to, UHD, I think they call it. But I have to say, for every time I watch the film, I'm going to have to go and reread Tolkien and the Great War or Carpenter's biography just to remind me of the truth. So kind of like a film shower, if you will. So there you have it, folks. Our extended thoughts on Tolkien. And if you're skipping ahead to avoid spoilers, well, you can start listening again now.
And please, go see the movie and let us know what you thought. As always, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. And now, let's sit in the parlor and see if we might hear something to our advantage in the first half of Chapter 10, Strider.
The real question is, will our listeners hear anything to their advantage in the next hour and a half?
Well said, sir. Very good. Well, I'm going to have you start at the very beginning of the chapter.
Well, it is a very good place to start.
That's what I hear. So why don't you do that for us?
Frodo, Pippin, and Sam made their way back to the parlor. There was no light. Merry was not there, and the fire had burned low. It was not until they had puffed up the embers into a blaze and thrown on a couple of faggots that they discovered Strider had come with them. There he was, calmly sitting in a chair by the door. "Hello," said Pippin. "Who are you, and what do you want?" "I am called Strider," he answered. "And though he may have forgotten it, your friend promised to have a quiet talk with me." "You said I might hear something to my advantage, I believe," said Frodo. "What have you to say?" "Several things," answered Strider. "But of course, I have my price." "What do you mean?" asked Frodo sharply. "Don't be alarmed. I mean just this. I will tell you what I know, and give you some good advice, but I shall want a reward." "And what will that be, pray?" said Frodo. He suspected now that he had fallen in with a rascal, and he thought uncomfortably that he had brought only a little money with him. All of it would hardly satisfy a rogue, and he could not spare any of it.
But would it satisfy a mage or a paladin?
Yeah,
I mean, it wouldn't satisfy a rogue, I agree.
Or a ranger?
Yeah. Very well done. Very well done. So the hobbits get back to
It would
the
satisfy a bard for sure, because you
It
know
would.
bards don't make any money.
No, that's true. A bard gets a few coppers and he's like, woohoo!
Yeah,
I'm
I can
rich.
buy bread. I'm
that's
eating this
true.
week.
That is so true. You're right. My goodness. that is comedy gold right there.
Yep.
So
All right.
they get back to the parlor and Mary, foreshadowing, is gone. And interestingly, Strider's not like shows up at the door and knocks. He's already in the flipping
He's already
room,
there.
which is a little freaky, man. Come on.
And he's just there. He's not like he's hiding behind a table and he jumps out. He's just he's just there, and they don't notice him
in a chair by the door
until and they just don't notice him until they do.
Well, probably because he doesn't say, "Welcome back to your room."
I guess maybe.
"I've provided your turnback service. There's a mint on your pillow." I mean, what in the world? He's in the
holding
room,
his hand
man.
out for a tip, the rogue that he is.
I mean, yeah, you're right. Well, he's not a bard, so he's not that poor. But right. I mean, come on. This is a little bizarre. There's no knock on the door. He's just in, like he's got the key. He's got the master key.
Yeah.
Pippin's got to be like, well, I think I might have just wet myself. I mean,
it's a pretty understated reaction from Pippin, actually.
It really is.
Hi. Who are you? What do you want?
Am I in the wrong room?
I might have actually given that entirely the wrong reading. Hello. Who are you? What do you want?
I like that reading. That's pretty good. Oh man. So Strider's offer is, I'll give you information and advice for a reward. Now, I can't help thinking that Aragorn really does intend, as we'll see from the reaction that he gives later, for this initial offer to be declined. But you've got a little bit on that, don't you?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I definitely think he's testing Frodo's judgment here, kind of trying to teach him a lesson in caution. And I'm looking. I've actually, for once, I've got a physical book in here with me because I don't have this book electronically. But
I don't even know if it's available electronically.
I'm not sure if it is. But so the book that I've got here in my booth with me is Master of Middle-earth by Paul Coker.
Yeah.
It's fairly
It's
early
a really interesting
book.
bit of, it's written before the Silmarillion came out, which is why some of it
in the early 70s. And I think, you were going to say, some of it now is kind of...
came out between his death and the release of the Silmarillion. And so it does, I think some of the stuff has been superseded, which is why the book is often overlooked. But there's some really, really interesting gems in there, no doubt.
Yeah, there really is. And he's actually got a whole chapter on Aragorn. And I'm going to read a little bit from that here, specifically in reference to this particular scene.
Yeah.
Coker says, because of the debacle in the common room, he treats them like the children they have shown themselves to be, and proposes to give them unspecified valuable information in exchange for the reward of being allowed to accompany them.
Yeah.
The proposal is meant to be indignantly refused, and when it is, Aragorn applauds.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I have to say, by the way, we have not referenced that book yet, and we should. There's some really good stuff in there. So, folks, that's another one that if you haven't picked up, I don't even know if that's still in print. I'm assuming that you can get a used version, at least on Amazon. But if it is still available, we'll make sure to put a link in our show notes if you can still find it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you can either. I've got a very old mass market paperback copy that's very old, but in very pristine condition that I got secondhand from a friend. So,
Oh, wow. Nice.
yeah.
So now that Frodo, and we're not going to read that part, but now that Frodo is a little bit more careful, a little bit more discreet, Strider is going to go ahead and give his information freely. So, all right, now I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I know, and you may still decide to give me what I want later, but we'll find out. And that's when I'm going to go ahead and pick up with the information that he finally provides to Frodo.
All right.
I have quick ears, he went on, lowering his voice, and though I cannot disappear, I have hunted many wild and wary things, and I can usually avoid being seen, if I wish. Now, I was behind the hedge this evening on the road west of Bree, when 4 hobbits came out of the Downlands. I need not repeat all that they said to old Bombadil, or to one another, but one thing interested me. Please remember, said one of them, that the name Baggins must not be mentioned. I am Mr. Underhill, if any name must be given. That interested me so much that I followed them here. I slipped over the gate just behind them. Maybe Mr. Baggins has an honest reason for leaving his name behind, but if so, I should advise him and his friends to be more careful. I don't see what interest my name has for anyone in Bree, said Frodo angrily, and I have still to learn why it interests you. Mr. Strider may have an honest reason for spying and eavesdropping, but if so, I should advise him to explain it. Well answered, said Strider, laughing, but the explanation is simple. I was looking for a hobbit called Frodo Baggins. I wanted to find him quickly. I had learned that he was carrying out of the Shire, well, a secret that concerned me and my friends. Now don't mistake me, he cried as Frodo rose from his seat, and Sam jumped up with a scowl. I shall take more care of the secret than you do, and care is needed. He leaned forward and looked at them. Watch every shadow, he said in a low voice. Black horsemen have passed through Bree. On Monday one came down the Greenway, they say, and another appeared later, coming up the Greenway from the south.
Yeah, so if Strider was not testing them,
yeah.
I mean, come on. It's pretty obvious there.
Yeah, very obvious right there.
Yeah.
By the way, I reserve the right to change my Strider voice in the future. I'm not sure I can maintain that for 5 seasons.
I'm not sure. I mean,
that's sort of gravelly.
It's wonderful, but I'm not sure anybody wants you to maintain it for the full. I mean,
I'm not sure anybody wanted me to maintain it for 30 seconds. It may not even fit in people's minds. I just didn't want to try to sound like Vigo, you know?
No, it's hard.
I really have to try to distinguish myself from the film versions of these characters.
Vigo has such a specific way of speaking. He really gives that character a voice. He does. I don't think you'd have to worry too much about that, but no, I like what you did with it, and I kind of did a little bit of it myself too, because I kind of like the idea that when you first see him as just,
he's gruff,
the dirty old vagabond. Yeah, he's kind of gruff and gravelly, and as we get to know him better, his voice actually changes. We'll see that here in a minute.
That is true. Yeah,
something about the way he speaks does change, and so I think as that happens,
there you go. That'll give me a chance to do that.
There you go.
It'll be like in The Wizard of Oz when we go from black and white to color.
Yes, it'll be exactly like that, 100%.
Except in audio form.
Right.
All right.
And not an astounding technical achievement for the time.
No, you're right. Oh, goodness, no. No, this won't be a technical achievement at all. And it won't win any Oscars or get any kudos from anyone.
I'll give you kudos. Don't worry.
Oh, I have kudos. I'm like a bard. I could eat this week.
Woo.
I've got 100 kudos, barkeep. Can I buy something? No. Oh.
Nope.
Kudos are worthless.
Kudos don't pay the rent, folks.
No, they don't.
They don't pay your bar tab at the Prancing Pony.
They certainly don't.
I like the fact that we find out that Aragorn Strider, whoever Strider is, has actually been following them since they left Tom Bombadil. Yeah. This is going back to the very end of chapter 8.
Right there at the road.
Yep. And if you go back to the end of chapter 8, the dialogue that Frodo uses is this is pretty much it. I think there are a couple of words maybe changed, but yeah, this is pretty much the dialogue. So yeah, go take a look at that. That's pretty cool. He was definitely there. He was definitely eavesdropping.
Yeah. Definitely dropping some eaves.
Yeah. Even though we didn't actually see a sign of him until a few pages later when they got to Bree, but
when he follows them after they get through the gate.
Yep.
Absolutely. I like the fact that at the very beginning of the passage I read, we see Strider making a really oblique reference, I think, to the ring. He says, I have quick ears, and though I cannot disappear, I have hunted many wild and wary things.
Definitely.
I don't doubt for a moment that this is him referencing the ring.
Definitely. Yeah.
He knows what Frodo's carrying. So,
yeah. I cannot disappear, but I can usually avoid being seen if I wish.
Yeah. I can't do what you just did, and I know how you did what you just did.
Right. Yeah.
Are we square? I'm watching you.
Right.
I mean, this is clear.
Yeah.
Frodo's answer, of course, to all of this at first is just to continue to be a little defensive, like, why are you interested in my name? He finally starts acting the way he should have acted at the beginning, which is with doubt and skepticism. And, hey, I got to defend myself here. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is by maintaining my false identity.
Right. And that's why Strider tells him, well answered. Yeah. He's finally learning.
Good job, basically.
Yeah. In fact, I think that there's another passage in the Coker book right underneath the one I read a moment ago. This is it's just one sentence. I noticed one sentence right below what I read earlier. It says, step by step, he arouses the hobbits to the dangers of their situations.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he's doing here. He's luring them in and testing them, and also trying to teach them a very valuable lesson in being more careful than they have been, because they have not
been all that careful. Nope. No. Just a tiny little bit of careful.
Yeah.
They have not been careful enough.
Not nearly.
No. He references the ring again when he says that obviously you're carrying a secret that concerned me and my friends. And Frodo and Sam even jumps up. Frodo rises from his seat. Hey, now don't mistake me.
That sounds like the kind of thing a Black Rider might say.
It does.
If they didn't just speak in terrifying wails.
But notice at this point, he's not trying to pretend that there isn't something going on.
True.
He's gone from, no, my name is Underhill. I swear my name is Underhill. What are you talking about, Baggins? Bag what? He's gone from that to, you're absolutely right. I am carrying a secret, and don't you get near me or I'm going to, scream or do whatever a hobbit does when a very tall man threatens him. But,
the answer is not much
at this point. The answer is not much. The answer is just exactly, coil in a corner. Just, please don't hurt me, Mr. Man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point.
The warning about these black horsemen, he's telling them, look, there are people chasing you. Now, of course, Aragorn doesn't, Strider doesn't know that Frodo is already aware of the Black Riders. He's not aware, since he's only picked him up from that moment.
Right.
Though I wonder, let me go back to that moment at the end of chapter 8 and see if that's when he picked up, were they talking about the Black Riders?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Nope. No. He just says, Sam says, I'm sorry to take leave of Master Bombadil. I can't wait to get to this prancing pony. I hope it's like the Green Dragon. Merry says there are hobbits in Bree, and there are also men. Frodo says it's outside the Shire. Don't make yourselves too much at home. Don't get drunk in the bar and stand on a table and sing a song. He doesn't say that.
Amazing that he gave that specific instruction. And
yeah. No, he doesn't say anything about the riders. That's actually before they get there, when they're asking Tom, and that's when Pippin says, do you think we may be pursued tonight?
Right.
So
they haven't mentioned them. So it does kind of sound like Strider is mentioning Black Horse, and the way he says it, Black Horsemen have passed through Bree. He doesn't say the Black Horsemen that have been following you have passed through Bree. He's giving them the information as though they have no idea what they are. And Frodo's response, I think I'm actually reading this passage in a moment. Frodo's response, he says, look, I know what's following me. I know these things that you're talking about. So
you don't know them well enough, but yeah, absolutely. So let me go ahead and have you pick up there then, actually. I think that's a good idea.
Okay. So I'm actually not picking up right there. I'm actually picking up a little bit before that. Strider is actually sort of just kind of talking through the fact that if he had gotten in touch with them sooner, he would have stopped them from going into the common room in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
But Barliman wouldn't let Strider have access to the hobbits. So,
though somehow he managed to get in the room. I'm just saying,
after,
I don't know how that
happened.
Right?
I mean, he managed to get in after. I mean, I think...
Yeah, but do you think Barliman, gave him the key? Well, now that you're going to have a chat with Frodo.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, yeah. Why didn't he get in before? That's a good question.
Or how did he get in now? One or the other.
Yeah. That's a good question. Well, do you think he... began Frodo. No, I don't think any harm of old Butterbur. Only he does not altogether like mysterious vagabonds of my sort. Frodo gave him a puzzled look. Well, I have rather a rascally look, have I not? Said Strider with a curl of his lip and a queer gleam in his eye. But I hope we shall get to know one another better. When we do, I hope you will explain what happened at the end of your song. For that little prank— It was sheer accident, interrupted Frodo. I wonder, said Strider. Accident, then. That accident has made your position dangerous. Hardly more than it was already, said Frodo. I knew these horsemen were pursuing me, but now, at any rate, they seem to have missed me and to have gone away. You must not count on that, said Strider sharply. They will return, and more are coming. There are others. I know their number. I know these riders. He paused, and his eyes were cold and hard. And there are some folk in Bree who are not to be trusted, he went on. Bill Ferny, for instance. He has an evil name in the Bree land, and queer folk call it his house. You must have noticed him among the company, a swarthy, sneering fellow. He was very close with one of the southern strangers, and they slipped out together just after your accident. Not all of those southerners mean well, and as for Ferny, he would sell anything to anybody, or make mischief for amusement. What will Ferny sell? And what has my accident got to do with him? Said Frodo, still determined not to understand Strider's hints.
Can I just say I love that last little line? Even the narrator's pointing out,
look,
Frodo's
it's
total
totally
density
obvious.
here.
Frodo, come on, yeah.
Come on, Frodo.
But
you should pick this up now.
There's a subtlety in the language. He's determined not to understand Strider's hints. That suggests that subconsciously he doesn't want to understand.
Doesn't want to know.
Yeah,
exactly. I don't think he wants to realize just how precarious he is now because of what happened.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Even though he views what happened as an accident. Though Strider, I think, buys Frodo's position that this wasn't a prank on Frodo's part. But when he says, okay, accident.
He's giving that word the ironic weight that it needs. He is. It may not have been Frodo's intention, but that doesn't mean it was an accident.
That's right. It doesn't mean that it wasn't the intention of some entity.
Right.
And he knows full well that the ring has that capability.
Absolutely. Definite ring at work moment. And Strider's aware of it.
Moment. Yeah. Strider's always aware of it. He's very on this. We start to see, I think, Strider's massive wealth of knowledge and experience coming into play here.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And we'll see more of that as he talks about the writers in a little bit.
And we also see a little bit more of that balance that we talked about in the previous episode with, Strider's sort of self-deprecating humor, referring to himself as a mysterious vagabond. He kind of
with a rascally look.
Yeah, exactly. He's kind of making fun of his own appearance.
Yeah, absolutely.
We know that Aragorn, as he progresses through the story, is going to be a bit haughty. He knows that he is the rightful king, and he knows exactly who he is, and he's confident. But here, we do see that balanced with kind of an awareness of, look, I know I don't look like much, I look like a mysterious vagabond.
I clean up nice.
That's exactly it. Yeah, right now he's dirty. He's,
Oh, yeah. Probably hasn't bathed in months.
Right, yeah. Yep.
All shaggy beard, and he's not going to be getting any dates here.
Well, I should hope not. He's engaged.
That is true. But she's in Rivendell. He's in Bree.
Hey, no, not at all.
What happens in Bree stays
She's
in Bree.
a catch, man. He does not want to risk that.
Oh, I know. No. Oh, absolutely not. Are you kidding me? No chance. I should not have gone there. I shouldn't have gone there, but I did.
No, you shouldn't have, but you did, and it was fine. It was fun.
Yeah, it was okay.
It's all right.
So I love Frodo's naivete here, though, a little bit. That, hey, well, you know what? These horsemen were following, but, they missed me, and now they're gone. Are you kidding me?
I know, right?
Like, that's really going to happen. I think it's that naivete that we see at the end when he's still determined not to understand the hints. It's the assumption, or the hope, I should say.
I think that's it.
That reveals itself in an assumption that all is going to be okay.
Because Frodo,
it can't be this bad.
He can't be foolish enough to really think that the Black Riders just passed him by and like, well, I guess he's not here. Guess we're going to go back to Mordor. That's not.
Give up. Yeah, exactly.
He has to know better than that. I think you said the hope. I think he wants this to be true.
Yeah. And this is more of the Amdir than Estel. Let's put it that way. This is win the
empty
lottery hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is not like faith. This is just empty hope. You're absolutely right. And Strider, man, he does not mince words. "You must not count on that," said Strider sharply.
Mm-hmm.
He absolutely says you cannot allow yourself to even think that foolishly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, of course, his little chat about knowing the number of riders, which, of course, tells us quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then his talk about Bill Ferny. So after he tries to explain what Bill Ferny would sell, I'm going to go ahead and pick up right after that. "You can do as you like about my reward. Take me as a guide or not. But I may say that I know all the lands between the Shire and the Misty Mountains, for I have wandered over them for many years. I am older than I look. I might prove useful. You will have to leave the open road after tonight, for the horsemen will watch it night and day. You may escape from Bree and be allowed to go forward while the sun is up, but you won't go far. They will come on you in the wild, in some dark place where there is no help. Do you wish them to find you? They are terrible." The hobbits looked at him and saw with surprise that his face was drawn as if with pain, and his hands clenched the arms of his chair. The room was very quiet and still, and the light seemed to have grown dim. For a while he sat with unseeing eyes, as if walking in distant memory or listening to sounds in the night far away. "There," he cried after a moment, drawing his hand across his brow. "Perhaps I know more about these pursuers than you do. You fear them, but you do not fear them enough. Yet. Tomorrow you will have to escape if you can. Strider can take you by paths that are seldom trodden. Will you have him?" Yeah. If you're smart, the answer is yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see some of that in the very next passage, which I'll read in a bit.
Yeah, we will.
There's a lot here that
there is.
We get lots of hints that there's more to Strider than meets the eye. I know I've said that a few times over the past couple of episodes because
but this one really does tell us, doesn't it? I mean, he knows all the lands between the Shire and the Misty Mountains. He's wandered over them for years. He's older than he looks. There's a lot here about Strider's history.
Yeah.
Hints of Strider's history.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good opportunity to do a brief sidebar on just how much Strider knows of the lands.
I think so.
He is older than he looks. We know that, and folks who know the story may remember that he is 87 at this point in the story.
Yes, he is.
Though, as I think Tom Shippey reminded us, Aragorn was not 87 at the point in the movie when he says he's 87.
No.
He was actually 88 by that point.
He's 88.
Because he had a birthday. But at this point in the story...
March 1st.
That's right. At this point in the story, he is 87. The Tale of Years tells us that he was born on March 1st, 2931. And then after the death of his father, 2 years later, he was taken as Elrond's foster son. Then in 2951, as a young man of 20, Elrond revealed to him his true name and his ancestry, and that's when he began his labors in the wild. He meets and befriends Gandalf 5 years later. We learn that then he undertakes his great journeys and errantries. As Thorongil, he serves in disguise both Thengel of Rohan and Ecthelion II of Gondor. I mean, he has traveled extensively over the last 67 years, you could say.
Yeah, you absolutely could. In fact, even recently, he's traveled quite a bit. This is as good a time as any, at least until we get to the council, to recap the timeline involving Aragorn, Gandalf, and Gollum.
Yeah.
Now, a reminder, in the story right now, it's September 29th. Earlier this year, on February 1st, Aragorn, after years of searching with Gandalf, captures Gollum. For more details, let's go to one of our favorite sources, The Hunt for the Ring and Unfinished Tales. Here's a quote. "Hoping to escape detection by any of Sauron's spies, he drove Gollum through the north end of the Emyn Muil and crossed Anduin just above Sarn Gebir. Driftwood was often cast up there on the shoals by the east shore, and binding Gollum to a log, he swam across with him and continued his journey north by tracks as westerly as he could find, through the skirts of Fangorn, and so over Limlight, then over Nimrodel and Silverlode, until he came near the Carrock. There he crossed Anduin again, with the help of the Beornings, and passed into the forest. The whole journey, on foot, was not much short of 900 miles, and this Aragorn accomplished with weariness in 50 days, reaching Thranduil on the 21st of March.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. He's gotten around, and
that is a long way.
That is a very long way. Now, this isn't directly related to Strider, but it's worth noting that Gandalf arrived in Thranduil's halls 2 days later to question Gollum, and then he left again on March 29th. He arrived in Hobbiton on April 12th. Now, that's almost 800 miles in a lot less time, but he had a horse.
Well,
And
yeah.
he didn't have a golem. So,
yeah, that helps.
And then sometime in late June, Sauron attacked and Gollum escaped. We talked about that previously in one of our Meanwhile Elsewhere in Middle-earth segments, and we will learn more about that at the Council of Elrond early next season.
Yes, we will. But back to the text and some of the more discussions of this section, his own reaction when he talks about the terrible nature of the riders, when he says, "Do you wish them to find you they are terrible?" This is interesting. You know, we see that his face is drawn as if with pain. His hands are clenched on the arms of the chair.
Very strong reaction.
And he sits with his eyes closed.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful emotional reaction from a guy who so far has shown to be, very ultimately cool.
Very stoic,
unflappable, sort of very steady. So what happened here? Well, Hammond and Skull point out something very interesting. We aren't told how Strider knows about the Nazgul or why he reacts to what seems like a memory here. But it turns out that, and this is their words, the passage, in fact, is a shadow of drafts of this chapter in which Strider was still the hobbit Trotter, who had been captured and imprisoned by the Dark Lord and had his feet hurt by torture. So it's kind of a ghost of that old version. And it makes you wonder, was Aragorn at some point captured or imprisoned by the Nazgul?
It does make you wonder, and Tolkien leaves it open because he doesn't tell us, that Strider, one way or the other, whether Strider was captured by them. But it really does seem like a stronger, more emotional, more visceral reaction.
Boy, exactly.
We were both going there.
Really say that at the same time? Yes, we did.
Definitely more so than you would expect if it's just, he's read the lore.
Third-person knowledge.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, we know he knows the lore.
Experiential.
This is experiential. Very good. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it really is. So it does make you wonder just how he knows and what he knows.
Yeah.
But we do see that, Strider is kind of pointing out, look, I know about them and you don't.
Yeah.
And then, of course, his suggestion is, look, you're going to be lucky to get out of town. You probably will because it's daylight. We'll learn later that they want to only attack at night. And so the only way out is, once you get out of town, is to get out on these paths that nobody else knows, and I can do that.
I can do that. I can take you down those,
Yeah. And so now the hobbits have to think about it, and what do they say?
There was a heavy silence. Frodo made no answer. His mind was confused with doubt and fear. Sam frowned and looked at his master, and at last he broke out. "With your leave, Mr. Frodo, I'd say no. This Strider here, he warns and he says take care, and I say yes to that, and let's begin with him. He comes out of the wild, and I never heard no good of such folk. He knows something, that's plain, and more than I like, but it's no reason why we should let him go leading us out into some dark place far from help, as he puts it." Pippin fidgeted and looked uncomfortable. Strider did not reply to Sam, but turned his keen eyes on Frodo. Frodo caught his glance and looked away. "No," he said slowly. "I don't agree. I think you are not really as you choose to look. You began to talk to me like the Bree folk, but your voice has changed. Still, Sam seems right in this. I don't see why you should warn us to take care, and yet ask us to take you on trust. Why the disguise? Who are you? What do you really know about my business? And how do you know it?"
Fair questions.
Yeah.
Fair questions.
Very fair questions. And Frodo really starting to get wise, starting to show the kind of good judgment that Strider's trying to teach him.
That if only he'd shown an hour ago, things would be so much better.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that Sam is the first to speak. I think we see this as kind of that continuing parochial nature of hobbits that we've talked about from all the way back from The Hobbit from season 2.
Yeah, definitely. What's that phrase that Tolkien uses? The mental myopia.
Oh,
that
yes.
Tolkien speaks of in letter 246.
Wow, good job pulling that one out of the hat.
Thank you. It's one that's just stuck with me. That's the one where he's talking about Sam being kind of cocksure and just sort of having more of that hobbit parochialism and kind of a prejudice, just sort of a...
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you see it right here. He comes out of the wild and I never heard no good of such folk.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, unwarranted skepticism.
Right. I never heard no good of such folk. dude, what have you heard of such
Right.
folk? I mean, like, you
And
don't
who
really
have you heard
know.
it from? Anybody with
Right.
any experience, really?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You have no real experience here, but he's so
Right.
sure of himself. It's
He's very confident.
I think I think I've said before that sometimes the hobbits and Sam especially is kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. You know, he doesn't realize just how little he understands the world.
Yeah, there's some real naivete there. You're
And,
right.
and yeah, okay, Strider does look shady. Anybody can see that.
Oh, of course.
But Frodo sees through that, doesn't he? I mean,
he does.
He still
very
has his
slowly,
doubts,
very
yeah.
Yeah. You are not really as you choose to look.
Yeah, I like that.
That I do too. There's this depth of perception on the part of Frodo here, as he recognizes, I should say, that Strider is more than what he appears to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like we're starting to see without seeing it that all that is gold does not glitter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which we'll get to soon enough.
Very soon in the next episode.
Well, yeah, I say soon enough, but it isn't soon enough. It's next episode.
Yeah, it won't be this episode. I should tell folks. I really have to point out that Frodo picks up on a change in Strider's voice. He says,
he does.
You began to talk like the Bree folk, but your voice has changed.
Yeah.
This is subtle, but we need to read this as some change in Strider's diction or the way he's speaking is what Frodo picks up on and makes him realize that, no, this guy's not really what he was pretending to be.
Yeah.
I mean, and that makes sense. You know, we know how important language is to Tolkien's world and how much language is linked to identity.
Absolutely.
Strider is speaking in a sort of more of a British dialect maybe at first. And it's not something that I think we can really pick up on, but, you know, Frodo has just in the way he speaks.
Oh, sure.
And that's as good as sort of an assumed identity almost, you know?
Yeah.
And Frodo's starting to pick up on the reality underneath.
And yet he recognizes that generates more questions. Why?
True.
Why are you now different than you were then? Who are you? What do you know about about my business, about the ring? Yeah. And Strider does begin to respond, but I'm actually going to pick up shortly after that when Barliman interrupts. Because that's the fun stuff right there, right?
It's so fun because usually it's Barliman who's about to say something really interesting, and then somebody else interrupts him. Now he's interrupting Strider when he's about to say something interesting.
Yeah, that is ironic. At that moment, there came a knock at the door. Mr. Butterbur had arrived with candles, and behind him was Nob with cans of hot water. Strider withdrew into a dark corner. "I've come to bid you good night," said the landlord, putting the candles on the table. "Nob, take the water to the rooms." He came in and shut the door. It's like this," he began, hesitating and looking troubled. "If I've done any harm, I'm sorry indeed. But one thing drives out another, as you'll admit, and I'm a busy man. But first one thing and then another this week have jogged my memory, as the saying goes, and not too late, I hope. You see, I was asked to look out for hobbits of the Shire, and for one by the name of Baggins in particular." "And what has that got to do with me?" asked Frodo. "Ah, you know best," said the landlord knowingly. "Wink, wink, nudge, nudge."
Say no more.
Say no more. I won't give you away, but I was told that this Baggins would be going by the name of Underhill, and I was given a description that fits you well enough, if I may say so. "Indeed. Let's have it, then," said Frodo, unwisely interrupting. "A stout little fellow with red cheeks," said Mr. Butterbur solemnly. Pippin chuckled, but Sam looked indignant. "That won't help you much. It goes for most hobbits, Barley, he says to me," continued Mr. Butterbur with a glance at Pippin. "But this one is taller than some and fairer than most, and he has a cleft in his chin. Perky chap with a bright eye. Begging your pardon, but he said it, not me." "He said it? And who was he?" asked Frodo eagerly. "Ah, that was Gandalf, if you know who I mean. A wizard, they say he is, but he's a good friend of mine, whether or no. But now I don't know what he'll have to say to me if I see him again. Turn all my ale sour, or me into a block of wood, I shouldn't wonder. He's a bit hasty. Still, what's done can't be undone." Oh, my goodness. There's some fun things to talk about here, some actual, substantive material.
Barliman's solemnity and his, first of all, solemnity later and earlier, it just sort of, he's very flustered.
He's very flustered.
Looking troubled. Just, it contrasts his mood throughout this passage, contrasts so nicely with just how kind of silly it is. You know, how funny Tolkien presents it.
He's got this sort of like hand wringing. You can almost see him like with his hat in his hand and just kind of like, if I've done any harm.
This is what happened.
Yeah. But he's not even explaining, by the way, I have this letter and here's why I haven't given it to you yet.
Just like,
he's starting with the excuses first, which is hilarious.
It's like this.
So
you
let me tell you the whole
point.
story.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. I love the stout little fellow with red cheeks and the reaction we get. Pippin chuckles and Sam looks indignant. That says so much right there about them and the way they feel about Frodo.
Yeah, I know.
And then Pippin could have fun and tease Frodo, but Sam
even
just
in this
respects
situation,
him so much.
Yeah, that's true. Even in this situation, Pippin can still have a laugh over this, but Sam is like, "Hey, don't talk down to my master like that."
Never mind that it's Gandalf. We won't, we don't know right then, but yeah.
I mean, what's funny about that is that, then Gandalf goes on to say, well, that won't help you much. It goes for most hobbits. Then Barley looks at Pippin, which tells us that, like you.
That's right. Stout little fellow with red cheeks. Good stuff. My goodness. And Frodo, of course, wants to know who it is. And there's a simple thing that if you blink, you miss it. A wizard they say he is, but he's a good friend of mine, whether or no.
Yeah.
In other words, wizards may not always be who you want to be friends with. I don't care if they say he's a wizard, he's a friend of mine.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's interesting.
Yeah, that's
very
a good point.
Interesting.
It kind of reminds me of when the gaffer talks about Bilbo teaching Sam his letters, but meaning no harm, meaning no harm.
Meaning no harm, mind you.
Like,
of course not.
Of course not.
Like teaching letters would be meaning harm.
Exactly. We would have the same reaction. Like, well, of course, a wizard is a great person to know. But in this society, a wizard is not somebody you would necessarily want to be friends with. That's a good catch.
Not automatically. And of course, we'll get more about that letters thing here coming up soon. That's a really interesting piece.
That must be why I had it in my head. Yeah.
Maybe.
That's a really good catch. I like the fact that he's now told them that Gandalf is a good friend of his. What does that tell the hobbits now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They should be able to trust him.
Mm-hmm,
absolutely.
I mean, if he does what he says he's going to do.
Well, right. If
3
he
months
proves
later
that this is true, and right. Also that Gandalf is hasty. I love
Yeah, he's a bit
Of course
hasty.
he is. These wizards are young, so of course they're hasty, right? I mean, that's what Treebeard would say, young Saruman.
Right. Right.
There's even a little bit of more wisdom, and I almost feel like this is another proverb. Have you noticed that Barliman seems to have a lot of them? I sort of think that what's done can't be undone is another proverb.
It does sound like it, yeah.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's just...
I mean, a lot of times Tolkien puts them in italics so that it's really obvious that they're a proverb. He doesn't do that here, but you're right. It does sound like a proverb.
Yeah. And Butterbur has this tendency to speak in those.
Yeah. Well, one thing drives out another, as you'll admit,
Right.
Yeah. You're right. He does have a lot of those.
Just a bunch. All right. So this next section has some really good conversation bits after it. So I'm going to go ahead and have you pick up when he goes ahead and produces the letter.
It's addressed plain enough, said Mr. Butterbur, producing a letter from his pocket and reading out the address slowly and proudly. He valued his reputation as a lettered man. Mr. Frodo Baggins, Bag End, Hobbiton, in the Shire. A letter for me from Gandalf, cried Frodo. Ah, said Mr. Butterbur. Then your right name is Baggins. It is, said Frodo. And you had better give me that letter at once and explain why you never sent it. That's what you came to tell me, I suppose, though you've taken a long time to come to the point. Poor Mr. Butterbur looked troubled. You're right, master, he said, and I beg your pardon, and I'm mortal afraid of what Gandalf will say if harm comes of it. But I didn't keep it back a purpose. I put it by safe. Then I couldn't find nobody willing to go to the Shire next day, nor the day after, and none of my own folk were to spare. And then one thing after another drove it out of my mind. I'm a busy man. I'll do what I can to set matters right. And if there's any help I can give, you've only to name it.
And I love that because that's really a genuine offer of help. And we'll see that he lives up to that in the next chapter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why we entrusted our mailbag to Barliman, right? I mean,
that's absolutely
might take him a long time to give
us
us our messages, but he's always apologetic about it. And he gives us free stuff. So
that's right. I've got like a whole stable full of horses now.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
For a forgetful man, I have to say this. He tends to remember the details with extreme accuracy.
You notice that
he
too.
He remembers exactly what
Yeah.
Gandalf said. I'm off in the morning. Well, I mean, we didn't read that, but I want a message took to the Shire. Have you anyone you can send? And he remembers exactly what Gandalf said to him all these months ago. He just never got around to sending the letter.
I noticed that too. It's like once the memory, the floodgates have been opened.
Once it's triggered, it's there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like it just happened. Yeah.
Right.
Tons of detail. And then I thought that there's a little bit about valuing his reputation as a lettered man. I know we touched on that a little bit ago with Gaffer's line. Clearly, this is a thing of, it's a source of pride for him, which distinguishes him from the rest of the folks of Bree, or at least from most of them.
Yeah.
Which tells you, once again, we're not in a highly literate society.
Yeah. And it also tells us that Barliman is wise enough to know that, his literacy is, I guess most people who know how to read would say that in a non-literate society, but
that's true. It's a value.
Yeah. But it's definitely clear that there's not too many of them around. So it's something he is proud of. It's a badge of honor to him.
I mean, I certainly never think about the fact that I'm capable of reading as being exceptional.
No, of course not.
Because in our culture, in our
culture we
time,
live in, right?
It is not extraordinary. It is ordinary.
Right.
But that tells us that at least here in Bree, it is not at this time.
Right. Absolutely. So, we're not going to read this next part, but he talks a little bit about the trouble. These uncanny black men who've come, and the fact that they're looking for a Baggins. I do notice as I'm looking at it now that he was able to withstand the fear of the Black Riders, wasn't he? I mean, just like Maggot and the Gaffer. We talked about this some time ago.
That's true. We seem to think that maybe it was a Hobbit thing.
Yeah. But
apparently
obviously
even a man can do it too.
Barliman can do it too. Yeah. I mean, and here Nob is terrified. His hair is all stood on end.
Yeah.
But Barley, bids the black fellows be off, slam the door on them.
Yeah. Be off and closes the door. I think, again, we've talked about this, that they didn't have the fear cranked up to 10, let alone to 11.
Let alone to 11.
Because it goes to 11.
This one goes to 11.
Yeah, it does. I think they clearly were in their, recon mode.
Yeah.
Earlier on.
Yeah.
Just trying to gather information.
But still, you still see the fear that they do strike in some.
Oh,
like
absolutely.
Nob,
Nob's hairs all stood on end. Yeah.
And Nob,
dogs were yammering.
We know some of the things Barliman says about Nob. He's not terribly wise.
No, Nob's not a
pretty
particularly bright guy.
Yeah. But still, I think it's significant that Barliman is able to stand up to them.
I think it is.
But he still doesn't really trust that Ranger Strider, does he?
No, he doesn't. And that's exactly where I'm going to pick up. He says, after talking about how those black fellows were asking questions, and that Ranger Strider, he's been asking questions too. Tried to get in here to see you before you'd had bite or sup, he did. He did, said Strider suddenly, coming forward into the light. And much trouble would have been saved if you'd let him in, Barliman. The landlord jumped with surprise. You, he cried. You're always popping up. What do you want now? He's here with my leave, said Frodo. He came to offer me his help. Well, you know your own business, maybe, said Mr. Butterbur, looking suspiciously at Strider. But if I was in your plight, I wouldn't take up with a ranger. Then who would you take up with? Asked Strider. A fat innkeeper who only remembers his own name because people shouted at him all day? They cannot stay in the pony forever, and they cannot go home. They have a long road before them. Will you go with them and keep the black men off? Me? Leave Bree? I wouldn't do that for any money, said Mr. Butterbur, looking really scared. But why can't you stay here quiet for a bit, Mr. Underhill? What are all these queer goings-on? What are these black men after, and where do they come from, I'd like to know? I'm sorry I can't explain it all, answered Frodo. I am tired and very worried, and it's a long tale. But if you mean to help me, I ought to warn you that you will be in danger as long as I am in your house. These black riders, I am not sure, but I fear they come from... They come from Mordor, said Strider in a low voice. From Mordor, Barliman, if that means anything to you. Save us, cried Mr. Butterbur, turning pale. The name evidently was known to him. That is the worst news that has come to Bree in my time. And yes, it really is.
It is very bad news, absolutely, yeah.
You don't even want Mordor to be aware of you, let alone be sending their henchmen to your little town.
Right.
Let's cover this. There's a number of details here that are worth discussing.
Quite a few, yeah.
The reminder, of course, that if Barliman had let Strider in earlier, things would have taken a very different turn.
Yeah.
Barliman does seem to show some decent judgment here and there, but boy, his lack of willingness to believe Strider is interesting. I mean, he's got that same skepticism that Sam has.
Yeah.
And it kind of comes back, I think we see it a little bit. Remember when he's talking to Frodo and saying outsiders, begging your pardon, that's what we call folk from the Shire.
Yeah.
It's that same sort of
definitely.
small world.
Definitely. I mean, he says, no accounting for East and West, meaning the Rangers and the Shire folk,
right.
They're equally outsiders to him. And
you're both nuts.
Right, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But Strider, I think Strider is a little hurt by this. I mean, he really...
Oh, I think he is.
He definitely has... I mean, his response to Barliman is pretty harsh, honestly.
It is very harsh. I mean, he body shames him for one. Yeah,
he does, Who only remembers his own name because people shout at him all day. I mean, not only is he body shaming him, he's
so dumb he can't remember his own name.
Yeah, I mean, that's not entirely fair. But I mean, Strider is just probably somewhere deep down, he's probably tired of people always not trusting him or never trusting him, I guess is the way you say that. Yeah, it's
yes, that is the way you say it.
Always not doing that. Yeah.
There ought to be a way for saying always not.
There should be one word for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, there should. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I just it is kind of harsh, but you can kind of see where Strider's coming from because he and we see a little bit of this later on in the Council of Elrond. Remember when he gives that great speech about I'm known as Strider he says it, he mentions Butterbur
to one fat man in Bree.
Yeah. Who has no idea, I'm paraphrasing, but he has no idea how close he is to enemies that would
freeze his blood or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's some terrible
Yeah. Strider I am to one fat man who lives within a day's march of foes that would freeze his heart or lay his little town in ruin if he were not guarded ceaselessly.
Yeah.
But then he goes on with a little understanding though, because he says, yet we would not have it otherwise. If simple folk are free from care and fear, simple they will be.
They will be.
And we must be secret to keep them so.
Yeah.
So he understands the importance of secrecy, but obviously
it doesn't hurt any less.
It doesn't hurt any less
to be rejected like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, here's Barliman talking about Strider, and he says, "If I was in your plight, I wouldn't take up with a ranger." Barliman, I'm right here.
Right, dude, I'm standing right here.
What you mean is I wouldn't take up with this guy.
Yeah,
but you're not even. You're pretending I'm not here. I mean, I wouldn't take up with a ranger.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean me, the guy standing in the room talking to you?
Well, I think it's a hint that Barliman sees Strider as other. He's beneath even considering. It's okay to talk about him in his presence because he's just that. I don't know. He's just that untrustworthy. Right. He's just that. I can't think of the word. That much of an outsider. He's just that shady. It's okay to talk about him in his presence. He's
absolutely
that unrespectable.
So Barliman's got the questions, right? Why can't you just stay here? I mean, what's going on? What are they after? Where are they from?
Mm-hmm.
Frodo, of course, can't answer it all. I love that Strider doesn't hesitate.
No,
I'm not going to be secret anymore.
Yeah.
They come from Mordor.
Yeah.
If that means anything to you, you fat innkeeper, you. I mean, it's kind of the unspoken.
Exactly. You're right. And it is kind of like, look, the time for tiptoeing around it is past. They're from Mordor, and you need to be scared.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Butterbur's response is the right one. I mean,
save us. Yeah, worst news
that has come to Bree in my time. But I do like in the part that you didn't read. He's willing to help. He's willing to. He says, I don't know what I can do, but I'm willing to help.
Right, and he means it, and we'll see that he ends up helping out in the next chapter. But Strider has some ways that Barliman can help, and you're going to read those for us, huh?
Every little helps, he said, and then I'll read the next part.
Yeah.
You can let Mr. Underhill stay here tonight, as Mr. Underhill, and you can forget the name of Baggins till he is far away. I'll do that, said Butterbur. But they'll find out he's here without help from me, I'm afraid. It's a pity Mr. Baggins drew attention to himself this evening, to say no more. The story of that Mr. Bilbo's going off has been heard before tonight in Bree. Even our Nob has been doing some guessing in his slow pate, and there are others in Bree quicker in the uptake than he is. Well, we can only hope the riders won't come back yet, said Frodo. I hope not indeed, said Butterbur. But spooks or no spooks, they won't get in the pony so easy. Don't you worry till the morning. Nob'll say no word. No black man shall pass my doors while I can stand on my legs. Me and my folk will keep watch tonight, but you had best get some sleep if you can. In any case, we must be called at dawn, said Frodo. We must get off as early as possible. Breakfast at 6:30, please.
Well, actually, the waffle iron and the toaster downstairs don't turn on until 7.
Well, you make them turn on, Butterbur.
And good luck with that wake-up call. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
You might want to set your own alarm. Can you tell I've stayed at a couple of business hotels that haven't been so great?
Yeah,
I don't know.
totally.
Even Slow Knob has been working things out in his slow pate. Now, just for those who don't know, pate means head.
Right.
He's just a little bit.
He's simple.
He's not the sharpest bulb in the box here. I just
Sharpest
say sharpest bulb
in the box.
That's not much of a metaphor, is it? Really? Sharpest knife in the box. Yeah, brightest bulb in the box.
Not the sharpest bulb in the tool shed.
No. I must be tired.
Not the brightest fish in the pen.
Wow. That's a good one.
Oh, man.
Wow. Okay.
How badly can we mix our metaphors here at the Prancing Pony Podcast?
Oh, goodness. You know, we don't want to necessarily see the bones that the soup is made of here.
But we record late.
Yeah, we do. We do record late. So they're not going to get in here. Barliman is absolutely determined. Don't you worry about it. I don't care how tough these guys are. They're not getting past our doors. Well, then, okay.
Well, okay.
I mean, you're braver than you look.
Yeah, no kidding.
Me and my folk will keep watch tonight. Well, then, I guess I can sleep easy. I hope it's a comfortable mattress because I'm going to need my rest. I got to get up really early.
And I hope he's given a variety of different pillows because, you know, the ones that you get on the bed.
Soft and then firm.
Too soft.
And
yeah.
And then what's with those like 4-foot long pillows? How good are those? Are not useful at all. I can't
really? I love
bundle
those.
them up.
I
do.
Love those pillows.
All they do is they just kind of stick up for like when you're lying down on it, they stick up like 2 feet to your left and 2 feet to your right.
I have really long pillows on my bed at home. Not that I want people to imagine my bed at home, but it's I've got the really long pillows.
I've had it made like a mountain range with 2 snow white pillows for my big fat head. I love that song.
Big time.
Yeah, man, that's a great one, isn't it?
Yeah, that is. Snow white pillows for my big fat head.
Yeah, I love that. Peter Gabriel's So, I believe, was the first album I purchased on CD.
Really?
Just a piece of trivia, yeah. Yeah. The very first time I bought a CD, I bought 2 CDs at the same time. And it was that and U2 Joshua Tree.
Okay, because those were both out at around the same time, right? So might have been a little earlier, but because what was So?
I probably had them on cassette, I think, and it was just like safely buying music I knew I liked. Because, hey, I had a new CD player, and like nobody I knew had a CD player.
Yeah.
Probably 88.
Okay, so they were both a couple of years old at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first...
Well, I was never on the bleeding edge.
Still aren't.
Not when it comes to trends and styles.
Still aren't.
No, I'm not.
As we make our 80s references while reading a book from the 1950s, yeah.
Exactly. Oh, goodness. We're going to get mocked incessantly now.
My first CD...
As well we should.
Well, my first CD, I first got a CD player in, I think, 1990 or 1991, and the first CD I bought was Pink Floyd's The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. From 1967. Their first album from 1967.
Yeah. That is hilarious.
And I already had like 3 copies of it. You know, like I had it on tape and I think I might have had a tape copy from a friend, you know, because we used to do that back in the 80s. But yeah.
And yes, I just checked, by the way, So came out in 86 and Joshua Tree came out in 87. And that sounds right because I graduated high school in 86. And I probably bought that CD player in 88 as a sophomore in college.
There you go.
There you have it. Anyway, just a useless piece of trivia that we might ask a question about at some moot.
At some future moot
give away
meeting.
A T-shirt.
Yeah. What were the first 2 CDs Alan bought?
I really
the first
doubt
CD
that
Sean bought?
What's the first CD Sean bought? There you go. Or at least name the bands. That'll suffice. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read the last passage for tonight's discussion. That's right, folks. We're going to leave it at a very interesting little cliffhanger, and I'm going to go ahead and pick up here where Barliman says he's going to go ahead and handle that 6:30 breakfast call. He says, "Good night. Now, bless me, where's your Mr. Brandybuck?" I don't know, said Frodo with sudden anxiety. They had forgotten all about Merry, and it was getting late. I'm afraid he is out. He said something about going for a breath of air. Well, you do want looking after, and no mistake. Your party might be on a holiday, said Butterbur. I must go and bar the doors quick, but I'll see your friend is let in when he comes. At last, Mr. Butterbur went out, with another doubtful look at Strider and a shake of his head. His footsteps retreated down the passage. Bum, bum, bum. Merry is missing.
They'd forgotten all.
Hello.
It's like,
there's only 4 of you. How did you forget
there
about
was
25% of your
there?
group?
Yeah.
That's pretty funny. And I love Barliman's response, though. Well, you want looking after, no mistake. You guys are acting like you're on vacation.
Your party
not running for Black Riders. Yeah. That is funny stuff.
Again, you start to wonder, did they maybe drink more than Tolkien let on?
Yeah, maybe. Even Sam, who should have gotten back and goes, where's Merry? You'd think Sam would have done that.
Yeah, you'd think Sam would have been together enough, but no.
I think they're all just a little bit out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that ale's pretty strong there. It's maybe after Barliman gets his ale cursed here for forgetting to give him the letter, it might be a little watery.
It's a little bit like what's the movie a few years ago about the guys who go out partying and they get drunk and one of them goes missing?
I don't know. I missed that one.
The Hangover, I think maybe.
Oh, maybe that sounds like the kind of plot line of something like that, but I don't remember seeing it. Sorry.
It just sounds like that kind
of pop culture reference I don't know.
You're like Tolkien, a pop culture reference from after 1989,
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much that's true. I mean, if it's a pop culture reference from, I'd say probably anything after the 90s, unless
it's like sci-fi 90s. Or fantasy related.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Bab 5, the Star Trek universe, Firefly, anything like that, we're good to go.
The day Alan bought that Peter Gabriel and U2 CD, he just checked out from the world forever.
Pretty much. I mean, I think I was just listening to So the other day. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. My Amazon Music playlist is 180 songs on a classic rock playlist, and it's all stuff that dates back to late 60s to early 80s.
I mean, honestly, I'm this week I think I've been listening to Emerson, Lake and Palmer and
There you go.
And Peter Gabriel Genesis stuff from the early 70s.
Yes. Yeah, the early Genesis. Yeah. Total prog rock. Yeah, you bet.
So my wife sometimes looks at the Amazon music history. She's like, really? That stuff again? Come on.
Really? I know.
She likes some of it, but then every once in a while.
I have to admit, I'm almost ready to go ahead and sign up for the Amazon Music family plan just so I can create my own playlists and not have somebody mock them. Because right now we share one, and so if she's streaming, I can't play, and But yeah, I really want to just avoid being judged. Yeah. She's just shaking her head. Really, Back in Black? Yeah. I mean, come on.
It says here you listen to this one song over and over again for 30 minutes on your way home.
Really, you're listening to Money from Pink Floyd again?
Right. Yeah, that would totally be me.
Oh, I know. I'm being mocked for it. We have been rambling, and I think it's time to stop rambling and wrap the episode up. But I do like one last thing. Barliman's response, he's going to go ahead and send Nob out. He's not going to go look for Merry. He's going to send Nob.
It's going to be dangerous. Let me send Nob.
I've got to stay here and watch the pony because I got to make sure the Black Riders don't get in here.
Right.
But I'm definitely not going out there.
Right. Yeah. Let's send Nob. That's hilarious.
And now it's almost time for our footsteps, by the way, to retreat down the passage.
Yeah.
As we wrap up our discussion of the first half. I thought that might work. I liked it. Of Strider. But be sure to come back next week when we finally get some long-awaited mail.
Now, before we reach into Barliman's rather delayed bag, we want to remind you about the fellowship of the podcast. As you know by now, our Discord server is up and running. Once a month, our patrons come and hear our goofs and gaffes, and we've had a few of those tonight.
We have.
Our edits and our outtakes, not to mention getting a sneak peek in an episode weeks before everyone else.
Now, in order to keep that humiliation amongst friends, our Discord server is limited to patrons who are at the Gift of Gondor level or higher. So if you want to listen in live during an episode recording, be sure to check out patreon.com/prancingponypod. You can get access to exclusive content and PPP swag when you join up. And check out our next goal, we probably will have reached it by the time this airs, of setting up a monthly live hangout with us on Discord.
And if you're looking for a new Tolkien book, check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where we've put together a set of links for our listeners to all the books we've ever mentioned on the show, Tolkien or otherwise. And if you wouldn't mind posting a review on iTunes, we'd really be grateful for that. Folks, I know I say this in every episode, but it really is true. It increases our visibility. That gets us out there for more new listeners. That brings in more great questions for Barliman. And it's been amazing. People are still discovering us and still sending us in
I love
questions
that.
on.
I was just reading one
episodes.
today. Some guy just found us, and he's on episode 3, and he's looking forward to catching up and thinking, "Wow,
it's great.
What a journey that is!"
It's great stuff, and it's great to hear from people who are just catching up, and they finally get to that point where they're caught up and they're getting engaged on social media, and really that creates that livelier Tolkien community that we're looking for.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of social media, it's helpful if you share us there. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit. Wherever there are Tolkien fans, let them know about us. Now, with that, it is time to see what old Barliman has in the mailbag for us. Sean?
Well, to start with tonight, Brian S. in Carmel, Indiana, wrote to us with a question about the names of inns in Middle-earth. He said the inns we hear about in the area of the Shire and Bree are the Ivy Bush, the Green Dragon, the Golden Perch, and the Prancing Pony. Good name, he says. I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Do we know of other inns or eating houses in Middle-earth? Is there any significance to their names being descriptive of creatures or plants? Was this something common in medieval times or in Victorian England? I enjoy those names, especially the Golden Perch. Perch is delicious.
I imagine the fish and chips there are pretty good, yeah.
I imagine it probably is quite good. Excellent question, Brian. And we'll start with other inns or eating houses in Middle-earth. I think there are a few others, aren't there, Alan?
Indeed, all the way at the end of the book. When we get to the Scouring of the Shire, we're going to hear about 2 other named inns. There's the Bridge Inn, which is right on the bridge over the Brandywine, which was apparently torn down by Sharky's ruffians to make room for a guardhouse, which Mary calls a dismal place. Now, about 22 miles further in, the town of Frogmorton had a good inn called the Floating Log, which the hobbits looked forward to staying at on their way home, but it too was closed under the ruffian regime.
That's right. And there's also the Forsaken Inn, which is a day's journey east of Bree, according to Strider. That's going to be mentioned in the next chapter.
Yeah, and I've run into that in Lotro.
Oh, cool.
There may have been others as well. In The Hobbit Chapter 2, we were told that Bilbo's journey started out through Hobbit lands inhabited by decent folk with good roads and an inn or two. Now, these inns are never named in The Hobbit, but based on the geography, it certainly seems possible that one of them would have been the Forsaken Inn near Bree. But another of these unnamed inns, this is a little gem, was named in Tolkien's 1960 rewrite of The Hobbit. Now, that was documented by John Ratliff in The History of The Hobbit, and this was Tolkien's attempt to bring The Hobbit up to that higher epic style of The Lord of the Rings, the one that never ended up seeing the light of day.
Right.
Now, in some notes on that rewrite, Tolkien wrote that Bilbo and the dwarves stayed at the All Welcome Inn on the Hobbiton side of Frogmorton on the night of April 28th. Tolkien also commented that the All Welcome Inn should be marked on the needed Shire map in any new edition of The Hobbit.
That's a deep cut of Tolkien lore right there.
Boy, it sure is, huh?
Yeah.
I wonder if they have a AAA discount there at the All Welcome Inn.
Well, if all are welcome, maybe not.
Yeah,
maybe everybody gets the same discounts. I don't know.
There you go. None of these exclusive rates.
Right. There's one other named inn that I can think of far from the Shire. It's actually in Minas Tirith. Pippin meets Beargill, son of Baragond, at the old guest house. Which, judging by the name, it sounds like it was apparently an inn. It was located in Rathkellardine, which is the Lampright Street. And at the time, it was being used as a shelter for some of the boys staying in the city during the Siege of Gondor. But that seems to be one as well.
Huh.
Now, as for the second question, why all these inns are named after creatures or plants, and is this something from English history? The answer is yes, actually. In Britain,
yes, it is.
Pubs and inns do have a tradition of simple but very colorful and very descriptive names that match a picture on the sign hanging outside. I mean, you can look at pictures of British pub signs and they're colorful, descriptive, just really cool pictures.
Visual,
Yeah, very visual. Now, according to the website historicuk.com, that's historic-uk.com, and I'll put a link to this article in our show notes. Some say that the practice goes back to the Romans, who apparently hung vine leaves outside of taverns to show that wine was sold there.
Yeah.
But grapevines were harder to come by in Britain, so when the Romans were occupying Britain, instead of vine leaves, they hung evergreen plants and bushes outside of taverns instead. And apparently this is the reason they say that names like the bush or the something bush, like holly bush or ivy bush, like we see in the Shire, that's still a very common pub name in England.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that story kind of sounds too good to be true, so I'm not sure, but that is definitely a story that I've seen.
That's the story.
I've
mean,
seen it
looks
many,
legit to
many
me.
places. Yeah, I've seen it many
Yeah.
places. Now, what is absolutely historical is that in 1393, King Richard II passed an act requiring pubs and inns to have a sign outside to identify them to the official ale taster of the realm. File that under jobs I wish I could have.
The ale tester of the realm.
Isn't that
wow.
great? I know.
What do you do? I taste beer for the king.
I taste beer for a living. I guess, to make sure that it's a certain quality, worth the price they're paying. Yeah. Make sure it's actually
That's
alcoholic. It's not just like barley water
it's
that they're
not like
selling.
American beer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You're speaking my language there. Yeah.
There you go.
But yeah, so they started hanging signs outside to identify the pubs. And since the majority of the population was non-literate at the time, the names had to be illustrated so that people who couldn't read could still identify the pub. That started this tradition of naming inns and pubs after really anything that was easy to represent visually in a distinctive way. Animals, plants, household objects. You get things like the bull, the bell, the rose, the hammer, the white horse, the prancing pony, and so on.
The eagle and child, the lamb and flag.
Yeah, exactly. Now, that's another interesting thing. Eagle and child. A couple of episodes ago, we mentioned the fact that was named for the crest of the Earl of Derby. And that was another common trend after King Richard passed that act, was actually naming pubs after heraldic devices and coats of arms of local lords. Actually, the White Hart was King Richard's own heraldic crest.
Wow.
And the White Hart is now a very common pub name in England.
I did not know that. Fascinating. I like the idea of pubs named after household objects. I'm thinking like, I don't know, the dining room table, the couch, the ironing board.
I wouldn't be surprised to find some, because, it's one of those things that I think if you study the history of these pub names, as time goes on, they get more creative.
They
start to get more interesting and
just to distinguish themselves from other
pubs, exactly. Just to stand out. So they start getting a little silly. And I mean, you can look online, just UK pub names, and there's some really interesting ones.
That's great stuff. I love it. Now, obviously, Bree and the Shire have that same tradition, which makes perfect sense for the same reason. Shire hobbits and Bree folk, as we've discussed before, they're just not literate on a large scale.
Yeah.
We know the gaffer was concerned about Bilbo learning Sam his letters. And earlier we talked about Barliman valuing his reputation as a man of letters.
Absolutely.
Which, of course, means it distinguishes him from others in the community.
Yep. So there you go, Brian. Absolutely a thing in England, and then that's why Tolkien used it. So
yeah.
Well, next up, we've got a question from Daniel M. He wrote to us a few months ago with a question about Frodo's new friend. One of the main themes of The Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's works generally has to do with power, the ring, and that using or seeking power, even for good purposes, ends in corruption. I have oft complained about the depiction of Aragorn in Jackson's films as a weak and as a reluctant leader. You're not alone, Daniel.
Yeah, I've never complained about that. Never,
ever. This episode or the previous episode.
The last 10 minutes, yeah.
Right. Daniel says it's a very modern trend. It seems opposed to Aragorn's character in the book, who isn't afraid to whip out his broken sword and prove that he is Isildur's heir.
Yeah.
In light of what the work has to say about power, however, even when pursued for good ends, how do we explain Aragorn's character, especially in comparison to the films? Some quick things that come to my mind, again, this is still Daniel, are that in the book, while he doesn't shy away from the kingship, he doesn't really pursue it either. Also, being the king is who he was born to be, not something other than or outside of himself that he seeks. Could those be good explanations for why Aragorn doesn't shy away from being made king of Gondor, despite the book's repeated warnings about power? Really great question, Daniel. Alan, why don't you start with this one?
Okay. Well, it's true. Aragorn is just being who he was born to be. That's right. He doesn't pursue power. He was born to play a role that he understands and accepts. Now, I think we mentioned earlier about how at 20 years old, Elrond explained to him his lineage and his destiny, if you will, his role, who he was.
Yeah.
Now, this helps us, I think, understand why Aragorn is able to start from apparently nothing. We know, of course, that's not really the case.
Right.
And step into the kingship without becoming corrupted. I think it's worth mentioning here one of Tolkien's most famous quotes about monarchy from Letter 52 to his son Christopher. Now, this is a letter that's often quoted out of context in regards to Tolkien's thoughts on anarchy.
Oh, right.
But going further, it's that famous letter about, not What did he say? Not mustached men
not
and
whiskered
bombs,
men
or
with
whiskered men
bombs.
and
Yeah.
bombs, right? So here he says, the most improper job of any man, even saints who at any rate were at least unwilling to take it on, is bossing other men. Not one in a million is fit for it, and least of all those who seek the opportunity. And at least it is done only to a small group of men who know who their master is. The medievals were only too right in taking nolo episcopari as the best reason a man could give to others for making him a bishop. To explain, that is, choosing bishops who profess not to want the job. Tolkien goes on to say, give me a king whose chief interest in life is stamps, railways, or racehorses, and who has the power to sack his vizier, or whatever you care to call him, if he does not like the cut of his trousers. Now, that seems to me to be a statement in support of having decisive rulers, people who exercise power comfortably and kind of natively and inherently, I guess would be a way to put that.
Yeah, good way of putting it, yeah.
But who have interest outside of exercising that power. Now, this letter was written long before Aragorn was dreamt of by Tolkien, but maybe he fits this model to some degree. I mean, he is decisive, he knows his power, he's not afraid to exercise it, but his chief interest isn't to attain or even exercise that power.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but Aragorn's chief interest in life was stamp collecting. So
that's
he
true,
does fit with Tolkien's first example. Yeah.
Well, at least he had an interest in saving Middle-earth for its own sake, and not just for the sake of ascending to the throne. But yeah, I'd love to see a stamp collection.
I'm sure it'd be a really good one. Probably kind of wet, from sleeping outside and stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
They're all
Which means it's all stuck together, right?
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. No.
Terrible philatelist there.
Oh, good
Isn't
word.
philatelist? Yeah. Isn't that the stamp collecting? That's not coin collecting, is it?
No, that's
I don't remember.
numismatist.
That's numismatist. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. No, of course you're right. You're absolutely right. He's not interested in the throne for the throne's own sake. And I think
right.
In regards to the idea that not one in a million is fit for the job of ruling, as Tolkien says, I'd like to add one of my favorite quotes from letter 144. This is a letter to Naomi Mitchison, and it's one of those letters about ennoblement, when he talks about how the elvish blood in the line of men was the only real claim to nobility.
Ah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, less than one in a million men may be fit for the job, but Aragorn is one of those who is, and that's just part of who he is. When he whips out his sword and proclaims himself Isildur's heir, he's just stating a fact of his heritage.
That's true.
And his goal of attaining the throne isn't a matter of seeking power, and it's certainly not a matter of seeking power that he has no authority to claim. It's not like he's trying to attain some power that's not his. It's a matter of seeking to play a role that's been assigned to him. It's really
good way of putting it. Yeah,
it's a matter of Estel, and I think significant that that's the name he grew up with. It is truly a matter of Estel, of hope and belief that he has a part to play. I mean, it's similar to his ancestor Tuor way back in the First Age.
Well, that's a good comparison. Yeah.
And I think that is what helps Aragorn not be corrupted by power. As Daniel says, he doesn't pursue it. He's just sort of playing a part he's been assigned. He's just being who he is and being where he needs to be, I guess.
Yeah. And if there's any, what's the word I'm looking for? Not ulterior motive, but if there's anything to be gained by ascendancy to the throne, it's Arwen. I mean, that's really his motivation here. Is to prove to Elrond, is to live up to his role. Elrond's already said, this is your job. You need to be the king of the United Kingdom of Gondor and Arnor. And if you're not going to be able to marry Arwen.
Right.
So he does seek the throne for a reason, but it's not for the reason of the exercise of power.
It's a personal goal. It's not about the exercise of power. That's a really good point.
Now, I would add one more thing. This is just to kind of clarify that whole anarchy quote, the letter that we read earlier. When you look at Tolkien's mostly ideal Shire, what you see is this very minimalist governmental structure. It's not anarchic in the way we know it to be now, the whiskered men with bombs, right? This isn't showing up at the G7 summit and, breaking windows and wearing black.
Right.
It's really more libertarian rather than anarchic in our modern language. There was a Thane whose office was hereditary. There was an elected mayor, but neither of them actually did much, right? I mean,
that's true.
The fact is, individual hobbits in the Shire just went about their business without the need of somebody taking the improper job of bossing other men, or in this case, hobbits. So to tie that back in here, the story of Aragorn reminds us of Tolkien's acceptance of a rightful monarch, but the Shire reminds us that good monarch actually does very little to interfere in the day-to-day lives of his or her subjects. So that's a really good point, and it kind of makes you think that in
in an ideal society, I won't go so far as to say like a utopian society, because the Shire's not that, but in an ideal society where people are generally good people,
yeah,
you don't need to boss people around. You don't need to keep people in line, because people will do
the right thing.
What they need to do. They'll go about their business without having to be bossed around. Yeah.
There's that line about the fact that, they're the rules and they accept them as such. When there's a rule, that's what they do. They're not going to do something in opposition to that.
So. Right. Exactly. Very good point.
Well, thank you. Now, we should have time for one more because it's a short one. Paul D. in Bristol, the United Kingdom, as opposed to Bristol, Connecticut, I guess, asks, is Bob a hobbit? Sean?
Oh, well, that's hardly fair. I mean, we haven't even seen him yet. He's only
been
named 3 times so far.
Yeah.
But I know that this is one of those questions that Tolkien fans argue about almost as much as do Balrogs have wings. Maybe not quite as much as what is Tom Bombadil.
Oh, well, yeah.
But here's the basis of the question. We know Nob is a hobbit because when he appears in Chapter 9, he's described as a cheery-looking hobbit.
That's true.
I would add, hilariously bobbed out of a door, but that's beside the point. Bob doesn't appear until the next chapter. And when he does, we are never told whether or not he is a hobbit. And so some people do believe that he's a man.
Who knobbed into the room? Since Nob bobbed, did Bob
Perhaps,
knob?
Yeah. Yes, a dour-looking man who knobbed into the room. Tolkien cut that line for obvious reasons.
Yeah, very obvious reasons.
So yeah, some people do believe Bob is a man. I don't. I think he's a hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
I think it may be an oversight on Tolkien's part that he doesn't say it, and probably because by the time we actually meet Bob, Nob has already been introduced. He's appeared several times, and he was described as a hobbit 2 chapters earlier. The reason I think that Bob is a hobbit as well is because, well, first of all, Nob and Bob seem to be a pretty tight unit. I mean, they don't really have much of an identity apart from one another, right?
No. They're Biffer and Bofer. They're Dwalin and Balin. I mean, they're a unit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think Tolkien would tell us if Bob was, say, twice as tall as Nob. Or,
that's probably true. Yeah.
Had long blonde hair that hung down to his waist, something like that. Having already established that Nob was a hobbit,
or wore shoes.
Right, or wore shoes.
Anyway.
Had a great big bushy beard.
There you go. Yeah.
Now, having already established that Nob was a hobbit, I think the default should be to assume that Bob is one as well, especially since the point of view characters are hobbits. I think the fact that we're not specifically told Bob is a man suggests to me that he's not one. And if you're looking for some, not proof, but something to support this, for comparison's sake, Barliman and Strider are both specifically called men.
That is true. Yeah.
The third thing I'd point out is Nob and Bob together give a parting gift of apples to Sam when they leave in the next chapter. Not only does this seem like a very hobbitish gift to give, here's some apples.
True. Yeah.
It suggests
if it was mushrooms, it would be a clincher, but just saying.
Totally. That is absolutely right. Whereas if it was like, I don't know, a bag of gold or something, that would seem mannish.
True.
But yeah, it seems very hobbitish, and it just suggests that they feel some sort of kinship with Sam. And maybe it's because he's the only other hobbit servant around, and Nob's a hobbit servant, so maybe
Nob
Bob is
and
too.
Bob are hobbit servants. Yeah, you're right.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
This last one is total speculation, but I noticed I skipped ahead a little bit because I was just looking for just how many times does Bob even appear in the book? When the hobbits return to the Prancing Pony later, near the end of Return of the King, Barliman says Bob's gone, goes home to his folk at nightfall now. Now, we're never told why he's gone or why he goes home to his folk. Maybe that could mean that Bob's folk have been impacted by events in the Shire more than others, maybe even more so than Nob. I'm totally speculating here, but one possible explanation could be, I don't know, maybe is Nob a Bree hobbit and maybe Bob is a Shire hobbit by birth, or maybe he has some relations in the Shire and so he's leaving to make sure they're okay. I don't know. I mean, that one's, I guess, the sketchiest one, but I think there's a lot there. Maybe a little bit of a stretch, but I mean, unless you've got some bombshell evidence to the contrary that I haven't come up with,
some
I do think he's a hobbit.
Evidence. Yeah, no,
some bombshell evidence. Very nice. I think he's a hobbit. What do you think?
Oh yeah, I do too. In fact, here's what I say. I say thanks for giving all the possible reasons for Bob being a hobbit. So now I have nothing else to say except I think you're right. That would be what I have to say. No, look,
Very nice.
I honestly don't know about that last point. That is such a stretch. I have to find a way to disagree with you somewhere. I don't think
Okay,
he's going
fine.
home to the Shire or even Buckland after work each day, but I do think they're meant to be taken almost as a unit. And I think that bit about the apples, that really does kind of clinch it for me. I mean, it's a gift that they give him, and they're giving it,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it's a hobbitish gift, and there seems to be some sort of camaraderie there. Like,
Right.
I'm giving it to
exactly.
Sam, not to Pippin, not to Merry, not to Frodo, not to Aragorn,
Yeah.
to Sam.
Yeah.
And I think that to me, that says, yeah, there's no reason not to. I think you started off on the right foot. That the default needs to be to take him as a hobbit because Nob's a hobbit.
Yeah.
But
You're probably right. He's probably not going back to the Shire every night. That
That's
probably is a bit of a stretch.
bit
That's
of
a
a
long
commute.
commute.
That's a very
Yeah.
long commute. Going
Yeah.
back to Buckland, to Buckland, to Buckland, going back to Buckland. Yeah, I don't
Maybe
think
he's got
so.
some Shire refugees from the family staying with him.
Yeah,
and
well,
I don't
maybe,
know.
maybe,
No,
I don't
all right,
know.
fine. I'm stretching.
All right,
I'm
yeah.
stretching. But no,
Fine.
aside from that weak point, yeah, I think he's a hobbit.
I do too. Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast, and thank goodness, frankly. Who knows
Yeah, no
what
kidding.
crazy thing we'd come up with next. But please be sure to join us again next week when we learn that it is okay to look foul as long as you feel fair.
Folks, thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of this conversation, and it doesn't stop when the episode ends. See the comments, questions, corrections, and more on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdan's contribution tier, to May in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas. Thank you all.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, prophetic verse about your ascendancy to kingship to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com. Do you have yours handy? Because I can take mine out.
It's in a safe. Yeah,
Oh, okay. We'll try to get those into our next show, folks. Well, however long we have had, it is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.